this Friday evening, and we look forward to a wonderful presentation from our hardworking rep, Jesse Young. My name is Christine Cowan. This microphone's a little funny. I have the pleasure of being your moderator for the evening, and I look forward to a respectful interchange and dialogue. We're extremely pleased to be able to have the meeting here in the Port Orchard City Council. We'd like to thank Mayor Rob Batonsu and the City Council for the use of this beautiful venue. Port Orchard is located in the 26th Legislative District, which is represented in Olympia by Representative Jesse Young, Michelle Caldier, and Senator Emily Randall. The 26th Legislative District map runs from a portion of Bremerton all the way through Port Orchard into Pierce County, Gig Harbor, and all the way to the Narrows Bridge. So it's a good way to think of the 26 as from bridge to bridge. It's a diverse area filled with many unique needs. And our congressional district is number 6 for this area. We're currently represented by U.S. Reps Derek Kilmer, Senator Patty Murray, and Senator Maria Cantwell. So we're all on the same page with 26. Okay, so the plan for today is to hear from Representative Young, get a first-hand update on what's actually happening in Olympia right now that affects us, exactly what's been happening during the 60-day short session, and how it affects you. Then we're going to have the opportunity to ask questions and get some answers. So the very first and most important thing, let's begin with a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. So God first and then country. Will you please join me in welcoming Pastor Jeremy Despain up here at the podium, and my lovely, wonderful husband, Calvin Cowan, U.S. retired Navy. You want to come on up here for the pledge? Pastor.
Thank you for having me this evening. I'm a constituent in this area, and I'm thankful to be here. And I pastor the Bible Baptist Church, and I'm invested in the community. I'm also on the board of the Coffee Oasis, so we hope that it'll be a good evening tonight. Thank you for coming. God, we thank you for our great country. We thank you for the city of Port Orchard, for the citizens that are here tonight. We pray that you would please be with us, give us wisdom and strength. We ask that your Spirit would guide us. Thank you for this time together. Pray that you'd be with our representatives, with the authorities of our government. They need your strength. We trust you. We pray that you would continue to give us direction as we make decisions. And we ask these things in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So thank you both very much. That's a perfect way to start off this meeting. And just so we're all on the same page, we'll be listening to our rep for close to 30 minutes. And he'll update us on current issues, and we'll have the opportunity to ask questions after that. Please know that Representative Young will be available after the town hall meeting, or you can email him and set up an appointment to discuss anything individually that affects you individually, personally, instead of related to the group as a whole. And who knows, Jesse might just address all of your questions with his presentation, or we might not have any questions. So at this point, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing at this time our Washington State Representative, Jesse Young.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's a nice turnout for a Friday evening. Let's hope we make it worth your while. I think we tried to do that here. Don't be in a hurry. We're going to answer all questions. If you don't know, one of the pledges I made when I was appointed in 2014 was that I'd be the most approachable and transparent legislator out there. And I've kept that promise. These town halls, since 2014, I've held more than double any other representative or senator in the state. and we're going to keep those going. I think it's one of the fundamental things that we need to always edify as elected officials is that you're the boss, I'm the employee, I'm here to serve you, and I need to be forward-facing to you all the time. And hopefully that example starts to catch on with other areas of the state, because I think that's one of the worst things that we see down in Olympia is people get used to being there and they kind of forget what they're there in the first place for. I would like to take a couple seconds. Christine, thank you for agreeing to MC the event tonight. Pastor, I really appreciate it. We met earlier in the week, and I think it was just a great opportunity for us to have a local pastor leading prayer. Now, for those of you that don't know, I always lead off these town hall events with a prayer or an invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance, because that's how we start every day of session in Olympia. Not a lot of people know that. Every day we lead off on the floor with a prayer, and then we post the colors and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And so I think it's a nice way to kind of honor that and show you guys how Olympia works. I'd like to take a second to also introduce a couple of the elected officials in the room. We have Port Commissioner Ben Compton, and we have a school board member, Mr. Burt. And I'm trying to, any other elected officials, I know we've got the mayor here. I want to give a couple seconds. Mayor Patonsu, you can come up with me. I just want to say thank you to Patonsu, or Mayor Patonsu. You know, we've developed a pretty good friendship, and I think that one of the areas that is kind of missed in the politics, because what we see on the news media is so hyperbolic, how do you say that? Hyperbolic, thank you. I couldn't get that one out. I guess I've been on the floor all week past there's different layers of governance that you really have to apply a lot of effort to. And I just want to thank Mayor Patonsu because he's made that extremely easy. Your lives go easier if we can find a way to work together and kind of share the load and work back and forth between the things. And I've had a great relationship with you. I appreciate you making this venue open for everybody. I just want to give you a couple minutes to introduce the process.
So thank you, and it's great to see a packed room here. About the only time city council meetings get packed is when we start talking about utility rates. Other than that, we only get a person or two. So great to see this many people out. Jesse's exactly right. It's imperative as a local elected leader to have a strong relationship with your delegation in Olympia. We couldn't have done the Tremont project, the McCormick Village Park project, our Pathway project. They all come from our partners in Olympia, because we can't accomplish these significant projects on our own with local dollars. So I appreciate the relationship I have with Jesse and the things that we've gotten done in here in Port Orchard. We have a lot more to do. You can see all kinds of cool pictures and posters around the room of the exciting things that I believe are in our future, and we won't be able to accomplish them without a strong relationship with our partners in Olympia. So thank you, Jesse. I am going to sneak in the back room and find a few more chairs in that conference room, and then I apologize, I've got to sneak out here a little early. It's my anniversary with my wife tonight, and I promised to take her out to dinner.
I guess we can promo. These are things, stuff to come. So when you're done tonight, come take a look at that. I mean, I've had a number of meetings with Mayor Patonsu as well about making sure that we're trying to get ahead of the curve in terms of infrastructure growth, in terms of community needs. Was one of the things that I think I discovered when I got in was that our district, the 26th, ranked in the bottom third in terms of resources that are coming from the state. We are now in the top 10%. And we work hard to do that. It takes a lot of negotiation. It's the non-sexy things that happen in Olympia that you don't hear about every day. Usually you hear about the big bills that are making the news, but there's a lot of roll up your sleeves type of work, and Rob's been a great partner in that. So, okay, well, I've got about 30 minutes of an update. And don't worry, I won't try to press it out. If you don't know, I always leave at least an hour for Q&A, and we go unscripted. So Christine will walk around with the mic, and she's going to hold on to it, but you're going to get a chance to ask the full question, and I'm going to try to be as candid as possible. And I just have a rule that hope will partner with me. If you think I'm not directly answering a question or trying to beat around the bush or dodge it, start raising your hand during it. And then I will try to get back on point. I normally don't ever get hands raised, but that's my pledge to you to be transparent. So up on the screen here, we have the legislative website, and you have the leg.wad. I guess we're running it off the phone. We're not running it off the computer, huh? No, that's fun. Okay, so I show that because this is your way of interacting with us, and I guess I'm going to try to maneuver this here to go back to the main website here. It's your way of keeping track of us. I don't know that we've worked out how we're going to map that. I can't stand here and map that, so I don't know if you can maybe man that for me. If not, then we'll play it by ear. The reason why I have this up here is, number one, to show you a tool that's your resource. One of the things that I made a decision to do when I got down to Olympia was I would only use the resources to process bills that you have access to. I don't use the behind the curtain resources because in my mind, if I can't make it work off the resources that are available to you, then I should be advocating that they make those resources more available to you. I was delighted to find that I'm just as effective on this, probably more effective than some of the legislators that are using the other resources. And I found that they're actually pretty robust. You can find out right now on this map what I'm going to be doing potentially on Monday, on Tuesday. You can find out, and so if you scroll back up, please, it shows you what's happening on the floor, and you can pick a date. So you see that little button that says today. You can drop that down and you can pick a date and you can find out where we're going to be, what we're going to do, and you can find out the agenda. We have rules for transparency that say any bills that we're going to process, you have to have a certain amount of time to see those bills, and we have what's called a 5-day rule, so we can't bring a bill forward, we're not supposed to bring a bill forward unless you've had 5 days to review it first. And after it's been available to you for 5 days, then we can have a public hearing on it, which gives you time to arrange your calendar, come down if you want to testify on a bill, make your point known, reach out to your legislators at the very least. If you can't get down there, you can email us, call us. And while I'm doing that, I guess I have one of my staffers here tonight. Eleanor, where are you? Oh, Eleanor's in the back. Eleanor, can you stand up for a second? She's going to hate you for doing that. Eleanor's working the desk down there. And then we have Maureen, who is my gracious mom, who serves as a volunteer at the district office. It's important to me that they don't give us enough staff to man 2 offices at once. So one of the things that I've been able to do is I maintain an in-district office in Gig Harbor for you. You're welcome to come by anytime. You get to talk to the most beautiful and coolest mom in the world, I think. But it's important to me. So when we're when we're done in Olympia, I come back, and I usually do a lot of my work out of that office. I use it for my private sector business. I maintain it myself, but I leave it as a resource that's open for all of you to come down, so you don't have to try to drive down to Olympia to reach out to your elected officials. So these resources are available to you, and I use them all the time, and it's my way of advocating for bills and transparency and moving forward. And there are a couple of reports and such that we can find there. Mom, if you would hit the menu button. Drop that down and go to bill information. And there that is right there. And one click away from looking at any bill that we're currently processing. If you want to know what we're doing and if you want to look at the details of the bill, if you talk to your average local elected official, or maybe I don't give you a straight enough answer that you want, I don't know if he's really telling me that bill does what it does. And you want to check? This is where you kind of do it. You can type in the bill number, and you can look at it and see if it references. There are bill reports in there. There are graphics that show you how it's moving through the process. And it's a great way to check and validate whether or not what you've been told is actually what is happening. And there's another thing that you can do. If you scroll down that list on the right-hand side where it's advanced reports, scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see bills by sponsor. What the heck is Rep Young doing? Go ahead and click that bills by sponsor link. And when it loads up here, now there's an important thing for you to look at. You can type, so if you by default you'll see that it says sponsor type. So if you want to see what I'm doing, I'm in House, and so you can select House. If you want to see what Senator Randall is doing, you select Senate. And then this list will drop down a list of representatives that are currently elected during the biennium listed above. Now, if you wanted to see, this is pretty robust, if you wanted to see, what did Rep Young do in 2014 when he was appointed? You could do that. You select biennium. The very top selection up there. The drop down list, thank you. Now, scroll that list all the way down to see how far you can go back. You can go back all the way to 1985, and you can look at bills from 1985. You can see what the progression of legislation has been. So if you select 2013-14, you select that, and then you'll drop down this list, and this is a contextualized list of all the representatives there. And if you start typing in young or go to the bottom of the list, it's your choice. You'll see Y down there, and you'll see. And I think you might have to scroll down the page to get down there.
Jesse, how do you get on that very first page? I can't find that on my phone.
So if you go to, I can see that you're close. So leg.wa.gov, so leg.wa.gov is the main website. And then that should take you to the main page that we started at, and then you'll get menu. From your phone, you'll get menu because it won't show it to you. Drop down and select bill information. Okay, so once Mom, you can drop that down, then you can just type in young and it'll pull me up. There you go. And see, I'm a software engineer, so this gets a little easier for me. So you get the highlight up there, click that, and then find bills by sponsor. I'm going to show you the bills that I sponsored, and there were 3 of them. There was a marijuana tax revenue bill. We were trying to correct the initiative back then. You remember, marijuana was new, it passed by initiative. We were trying to fix the way that they did those revenues so we could kill the black market. Then we had a technology bill that I was promoting back then. And then the one thing I did get passed in that year, because I was appointed late, I didn't actually have enough time to pass a bill. We have calendars for how the process works. We're a part-time legislature, does everybody know that? We're not full-time. And in a part-time session, we operate like a football game. We have 4 quarters. The only difference between us and football games is the quarters aren't the same length. The first quarter is the longest. The second quarter gets down and it's usually about 3 weeks. The third quarter is about 2.5 weeks, and the last quarter is a week and a half. And that's how quick that's for a short session. For a longer session, they're a little bit bigger, but the ratio is about the same. And each quarter, you have to do something different. And the first quarter is when you submit your bills, and you have to then, during the time of submitting them, you have to get them through and out of a committee, which means they have to be publicly heard so that they can stand up to scrutiny. Then you have to vote it out of committee, and then if it has any financial implications, you have to vote it out of another committee, a financial one. Then you got to get it out of rules, which is purgatory, and if you guys can ask a question about purgatory if you want, I won't bother with it here. Then it gets to the floor of the House. We got to get that bill out of committee before the first quarter's over. If we don't, the bill dies. And because I was appointed late, I missed the deadline. I wasn't there long enough to do that. But I could get a resolution passed, and so the first thing I ever did was I got a resolution to honor the United States flag passed in 2014. And so if you ever want to see what any legislator is doing at any given time, what are their priorities, what types of bills they're running, you can check it right here as well. And I think you're seeing it's pretty robust. Now, why don't we hit the back button, please? Is there any particular bills? Anybody come here with a specific bill number that they wanted to ask me about tonight? That's the brand new one. Okay, that was dropped yesterday. Why don't we pick a different one? That's not. I'll get to that, but it's not.
House Bill 2679.
Okay, we go up to hit back again, please, and scroll to the top, and type in 2679. Your number lock's not on. Okay, so which one is this?
That's
CD. Okay, so we're going to look at this for the first time. So the title there is right underneath the bill number, concerning funding for individuals who are not eligible for federal insurance subsidies or for foundational public health services. Okay, so let me scroll down. Now, what this tells you then is it tells you who the sponsors are. By the way, I can move on. Is this interesting to you? Would you like to see how this works?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can see who the sponsors are. That companion bill, you see what it says companion bill? That sometimes is there and sometimes it's not. That shows you whether or not the Senate is running an identical bill to it. Because bills, if you remember that, I'm a bill from Schoolhouse Rocks, bills can start in the Senate or they can start in the House. And if there is a word or punctuation different in the two pieces of things, you won't see that companion bill there. But if you see the companion bill there, the exact same bill is running through the opposite body at the same time. Okay, so when we scroll down, and this bill at a glance I find is very useful. So what this tells you is, it tells you how it's stepping through the process. So you can see that it was introduced in the House, and then it was sent to committee. And there's nothing after that, which means that bill died after the Q1 date hit. So once Q1 was over, or our first quarter was over, which that happened about 3.5 weeks ago, because that bill did not make it out of committee and didn't make it onto the floor calendar, it didn't pass. Okay? Or it didn't pass, and therefore we stopped considering it. So after the first quarter is done, we can only continue to process bills that have made it to the second quarter. In other words, they've made it out of committee. And so, in that case, what you'd see is if it made it, when the second quarter starts, if that second dot is filled in for that bill, that means we can still process it. And it means that the bill's passed out the floor, it's passed out of committee. Now we have to get together as an entire body and consider the bill. Now, if you don't know, it's a team sport.
So is above 50% passing? What's passing?
Okay, so did everybody hear the question? And I'm resisting I gotta resist my urge not to do that. I'll answer the questions in a second. So there was no vote taken on this bill. So that question I'll get to that in a second. But yes, you have to have 50 plus 1 votes, 50% plus 1 vote to pass. But what that means is that the bill didn't even get a hearing, or excuse me, actually, we scroll down. Okay. Okay, scroll down a little more. Okay, so that bill died in purgatory. And I'll show you how to read that in a second if you guys want. But that bill made it into the Appropriations Committee, was passed out of the Appropriations Committee, was then sent to Rules, which is just one step below the floor of the House, and then no member chose to move it out of Rules. And that'll be important because for the gentleman in Hasty, there's some insight that you can gain from this knowledge. Okay, now in this case, the first quarter ended, and so we moved on to bills that had actually made it to the floor. Now, we have about 20 plus committees in Olympia, and it's like a team sport. If you are on a certain committee, it's your job to team with everybody else on there, Republican and Democrat, to deep dive into that bill. So if you're not on a committee that bill goes through, you don't see the bill. So this bill went through appropriations immediately. I don't sit on appropriations. If you don't know, I serve on the Transportation Committee, so I deal with the budgets there and all the policy on transportation. I sit on the Finance Committee, which deals with all the tax policy for generating state revenue. I sit on the Commerce and Gaming Committee, which is why you saw the marijuana bill in there, because we have to deal with all the regulation around liquor and cannabis and cigarettes or anything else in the state. And then I serve on workforce development and college education. Those are the committees I serve on. So I never saw this bill because it never made it out of committee. And the only way, since I'm not on the committee, the only way I would ever see that bill, if it goes through a committee that I'm not on, would be if it makes it far enough to get onto the floor. Does that make sense? And so for any given legislator, and by the way, 4 committees is a lot. Legislators average between 2 and 3 committees, believe it or not. So the likelihood that your individual legislator has seen a bill, if it doesn't get to the floor, is actually pretty small. Because while I'm going and deep diving into the bills that are on, say, the Transportation Committee, and really looking into the policy of how that's going to affect the state of Washington, appropriations is supposed to do the same thing on bills that go there. And they're supposed to try to perfect that bill as well as they can. Now, of course, you get partisan politics that come in. Some amendments are taken, some amendments are not. But ultimately, a bill's got to get mature enough to move up. And or sometimes politics just get in the way. In this case, so this bill, can we scroll back up and look at the title? Looks like it was looking to fund people that are not getting funded from federal resources. Did I read that right? So federal insurance, so people who are not eligible for federal insurance subsidies, looks like the proposal of this bill, without having read it, is dealing with some form of trying to provide additional services to people that are falling out and not getting covered by a federal subsidy, in this case the insurance subsidies for public health. And so, and I can tell from the roster list, this is, there's only Democrat sponsors. Those sponsors are only Democrats in the House. And so it might be a partisan bill. Now, the issue would be that, okay, so when I see stuff like this, one of the things that I advocate for is, I would ask if this bill is important, why didn't it pass? Because the Democrats are in the majority. So was the bill, did it not get perfected enough? Maybe it didn't get perfected enough, and they chose not to move it. Maybe a different bill moved. Now, what you could do, and here's some insight you could do, sometimes when there's a companion bill, they just make a political deal and they move the other bill. So we could check on the companion bill. If you click on that link for SB 6451, check that guy. Scroll down. Now you see it references the House bill that we were just at. And we can go down, continue down. And that bill died too, which means that someone sponsored it for a lot. Looks like the Democrat Party sponsored the bill, and somebody had an idea for trying how to fill in this gap, but it didn't get far enough along the process, and so it's now dead. So in the context, if you were to ask me how I would have voted on a bill, I couldn't tell you right now. I've not read it. But that would be an example of how you can discern that for yourselves. One of the things that I get down in Olympia all the time is I get people come in. You'll have to expect, if I can be extremely candid with you, you have to expect that the legislator you're talking to ideally is Oscar worthy in terms of acting performances. They're really good ideally at telling you what you want to hear, making you feel good about us because we want you to elect us. And one of the things I try to do with this is enlighten you to how you can check whether or not I'm ever telling you the truth or not. Because I get lots of people that come down and they say, I really would like you to support this bill, and so over here is saying they're supporting it. And I'll review the process and I'll go, well, if they're supporting it, why is the bill dying? Are they advocating for it? Now, there are bills that I will support, and I know there are people in here that like some of the policies I run or would wish and like the way I vote, and there are others that don't. But if you're a constituent of mine, one of the things I try to do to be transparent is I will always help you look behind the veil and see how to advocate for your bill, even if I don't like it. Now, if you would come to me, for example, before cutoff had occurred, and said, hey, I really like this bill. Are you for the bill, I guess, or have you looked at it? Or?
Yeah, well, I haven't looked at the bill. First, I heard a news clip on the radio about it. Then, 2 weeks ago in the Port Orchard Independent, there was an article written by the county commissioners in support of this bill. And when I came to realize that Wednesday was your last day for being able to vote, I realized that whatever had been going on with it probably wasn't going to make it.
Yeah. Okay.
And interestingly enough, the verbiage that's there is different than the intention, as I read about it and heard about it.
Okay, well, that's not uncommon. So in this case, I've had people that come in that maybe support policy A that I don't necessarily support. And they're asking, well, would you support it or would you not? Well, the answer is always going to be first, it depends on what the bill says. And if I haven't read it, I'm not going to commit one way or the other because maybe the title, it doesn't actually reflect the actual bill. It's worthy to note that. There was actually a bill that just passed off the floor of the House that, well, I'll give you two examples. There's a bill that just passed off the floor of the House that some members of the Republican Party didn't vote for, and I was surprised that they didn't. And it was kind of controversial. It had to do with racial discrimination against hair texture and hairstyle. And it was clearly listing out African American, that was the predominant thing, but if you actually read through the bill, it actually spoke to a number of different cultures. There's cultures from Asia, for example, where the men, it's a dishonor to cut your hair. And so it was broader in scope, and it was broader in scope and in intent than the way it was briefed to us, and then also the way it was argued on the floor. And the way it was argued on the floor was kind of inflammatory because it assumed that, the way that the members that made their arguments for the pro kind of made it seem like if you were a Republican, you were kind of racist to begin with. I can understand why someone would get mad at that. But I don't let that steer me. So I actually didn't look at the brief, and I didn't just look at the title. I looked at the brief for a second and couldn't get anywhere beyond what we were talking about before. So I actually read the bill. And the bill context itself was very straightforward, very magnanimous, and the right type of policy. So I voted for it. But that's an example of, you might actually read the title, you might actually read the brief, you might actually see the hyperbole that's discussed, and then realize that the actual language of the bill is completely different. And that's one of the things you would like us to do, is kind of read bills. another bill that was passed down. How many of you, I think everyone in here is constituent, so how many of you like paying $800, $500 for your license tab renewals? Oh wait, you don't have to. Because in 2015, now if you live on the other side of Puget Sound, and if you're in that part of Pierce County or up and down the I-35 road, Sound Transit has enacted a tax to fund the light rail. And that tax has been on car tab rules and is extremely high for a lot of people. And it led to the initiative that passed with Tim Island. I think it got enough people concerned about being able to afford their car tab renewals. You're talking $300 or $400 a hit per car every year. That can be quite a strain on your wallet. Now, we had a bill that came in transportation in 2015. And this was right before the Sound Transit 3 car tax passed by initiative. Okay? And before that happened, Representative Hunt, who's now a senator, tried to run a bill in transportation that was briefed and, you can see it on TVW, was advocated this way. It said, we want to allow Olympia, and Olympia only, that part of Thurston County, to have a vote of the people to vote themselves into the Sound Transit Taxing Authority. Now, Sound Transit Taxing Authority is 30 years away by their own estimates from ever getting down to Olympia. They got to get down to Tacoma first. They got to expand. They got some stuff to go north towards Everett, go to the east side, get across Lake Washington. These are all priorities that are going to take years to get done before they can ever get down to Olympia. But Olympia wanted, and now Representative Hunt at the time, he serves the Lacey area, and he wanted to say, well, our goal is we want to have a say, and we want to be at the table, and we want to be at the tables if you're in the district. So it sounded magnanimous enough, and he briefed it to us, said, look, this isn't controversial, we just want to sliver ourselves in, it doesn't affect anybody. Except I actually read the bill while we were in committee. And then I raised my hand and asked and said, well, staff, by the way I'm reading this doesn't say Olympia. This says any county or community that's adjacent to a current county or community that is within the taxing authority through councilmatic vote can add themselves in. So am I reading this right, that this would apply to any county west of the Cascades? And they said yes. And I said, well, Representative Hunt, that's not what you briefed your bill on. And he goes, oh, I didn't know that. And I said, well, then would you be amicable for us to change your bill so that it does what you say it should do? And he said, well, sure. Now, we had a bunch of other questions back and forth, and they eventually brought the bill down, and then the chair of the committee never brought the bill up again. It died. Now, what's interesting is what they were trying to do with that bill, based off the language of the bill, was extend before the real bad taxes came to SB3. They were trying to extend the taxing authority to all of Western Washington. And by doing so, they were hoping to dilute the cost out so that the tabs wouldn't be so high for the, and by the way, at the time, Sound Transit 1 and Sound Transit 2 were both over budget and behind in scope. They hadn't delivered yet. And so that was a big deal to me. So I started talking over that and made sure that bill, I ran the amendments on it, but they never brought the bill up to put the amendments on it. And what's interesting is Representative Hunt then became Senator Hunt, and he continues to this day to run the same bill with the exact same language. He doesn't put the fix in. And we keep killing them, because I'm not going to let them extend it out here and tax you, those tabs, if we're not going to get any benefit from Sound Transit.
Thank you.
That's an example of how the bill doesn't match with either the title or doesn't match with the brief of the bill. But often when I do this, and especially when I start talking about more controversial bills, I'll get people that maybe don't agree with me politically will say, well, I don't know that I trust you on it. Well, my point in showing you this and leading off the town hall is to show you how you can double check to make sure I'm not lying to you. You should have the right to do that. You should have the right to say whether or not you keep me accountable, because you're my boss, I'm your employee. I'm here to represent you, and I don't think you should ever tolerate any legislator not telling you the full truth and being transparent. So here's some tools that are available for you. We can give you more information if you want, and I gave you a brief backdrop of how the legislative process works. I can spend another, well, we're here until 8:30, and I've probably got about another 5 to 10 minutes, I guess, of a presentation. I can tell you really briefly what's happened in Olympia. So what's happened in Olympia thus far is it started before January 13th, which is when we officially started. The first thing that happened with our policy down in Olympia was Tim Ivan's initiative passed in November. And that was very impactful to what we had to do in Olympia, because as a budget writer on transportation, that took a lot of money out of what we could expect to be revenue to fund things. Now, it was never the big rhetoric that you heard in the ads for the pro and con. It effectively impacted about 8.2% of our budget. It didn't impact, in other words, over 90% of our budget was unimpacted by Tim Iman's initiative that passed. Now, the update from that, if you haven't heard, was that it was suspended. The judge ruled on it. There were 7, I think, constitutional challenges that were made to the bill, and the judge just last week ruled on 5 of the 7 and dismissed them, so they weren't valid. There are 2 others that they're still looking at, and so it still remains suspended. If prior to that announcement by the judge, I would have told you that they probably would have found a way to shut it down. But the challenges that were made that we thought as a Republican caucus would actually strike the initiative down were the first ones that we dismissed. So now we're not really sure it might pass. But for the context of the budget writing, I can tell you right now that as a transportation update, our budget is balanced. We balanced the transportation budget last year. I think if you've been to these before, you know how many budgets there are. Anybody care to venture how many budgets we have down in Olympia? Nobody? 3. We have the operating or general, so assuming we have capital and we have transportation. Those are the 3 budgets that we have. That, by the way, folks, is the main reason that we go down for session. Constitutionally, that is what we're elected to go do, is pass budgets to fund the state. The governor's job is to run it based off of how we pass the budgets and allocate the money. Everything else, policy bills, anything else that we do down there, House resolutions, all of that is something we can also do while we're down there, but our main goal is to write the budgets. And so we're elected for a 2-year term. Our first year was last year. And so of the 3 budgets, the one I have oversight over is the transportation. That budget was balanced. We didn't incur any more debt. We didn't raise taxes. And we made sure that we funded everything. Now that put us in a good light, because when an initiative like Tim Iman's comes out, that potentially reduces our revenues. That could put us in a hole. The reason why why the Constitution allows us to come back in this year, and if you don't know, more than half of the states only meet once every 2 years. I don't know if you know that. I think there's only like 4 or maybe 5 state legislators that are full-time. Michigan is 1, California is 1, New Jersey is 1, and there's 1 or 2 more. Other than that, most state legislators are part-time. And when they're part-time, like Texas, for example, Texas only meets for 3 or 4 months on the first year, and then they don't come back. We come back because we have what's called the supplemental budgets that we're constitutionally supposed to write. And so we write our first budget based off of what we think our revenues are going to be. And then we come back after a year and we say, well, what was the difference between what we projected versus what we have? And whatever the difference is, we have to clean up, and that's a supplemental budget. So in this year, we had to come back, we had to account for Tim Iman's bill. So from a transportation side, you can ask me any questions you want. I've spent most of my time in Olympia this year working on the budget, which means we go down into our basement conference room and we have all the executive branch agencies come through and they lay out the projects. Would you believe that I think we found that over 83% of the projects that we're funding, the Department of Transportation is actually not spending the money the way that we directed them to, or they're not spending it at all. Very, very interesting. Since I've gotten on the budget committee, what's that? It is terrible, and they're starting to pay a price. And the reason why we were able to balance the budget this year was because we took the money back. And so that's how we're funding the gap between Tim Iman's initiative and this. We're like, listen, if you're not going to spend the money the way that you say you're going to, then we're not going to keep giving it to you. And I think they've been operating under this. So when I came onto the budget committee, it was the same time we had a new chair. And Representative Jake Fye out of Tacoma is very skilled at budget writing. He's got a solid background in his professional career, and I found him very magnanimous to work with on that aspect of not rubber stamping what executive branch agencies are asking for. And I think that's the right way to do it. We don't agree on some of the tax policy. We don't agree on maybe the carbon tax. But when it comes down to making sure that you're getting the furthest spend for the dollar that you give us in taxes, he's 100% on board making sure these agencies aren't wasting your dollars. And so there's a kind of a new sheriff in town, and he's brought the Republicans in the room, and we're starting to save your money, man. I got to tell you, we've had some meetings where you just pull your hair out if you could be in. I mean, the first year, last year, we had Department of Licensing come down, and on one, now does everybody know that I'm a software engineer? And My real job, I work down in Silicon Valley a lot. I consult out of here. I've done stuff for a lot of the healthcare industry in terms of financials and supply chain, but I work in IT. We had an agency come down, a Department of Licensing, and they sat there with their experts, and they said, we need $30 million for a database upgrade. I go, whoa. Man, I'm listening to this, and I was really shocked. Now, the rest of the legislators in the room, they don't know what a typical private sector cost for a database upgrade is, but I looked at the chair, or the executive director, and I go, why is that literally 3 times more than the average cost in the private sector? And she looked at me, and she kind of looked to her staffer to kind of back her up, and then what she did was she looked at the chair, and I think she was looking for a lifeline. And the chair looked at her and shrugged his shoulders and said, yes, to your question. And it was very interesting to see how the dynamic in that room changed. And she said, well, she looked back at her staff, and staff's like, well, we don't have the numbers here, I don't know. And I go, well, okay, that's fine. If you got to go back and get your numbers, that's fine. But just let me ask you something real quick. You did get multiple bids, didn't you? I mean, what were the different bids that you got? And she said, oh, well no, we only got one bid. How is that? How is it? I mean, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. If you're the executive director and you're going to ask us for $30 million, you better at least have 3 bids so we can, I mean, that's common sense. And so we pushed back on them, and they got 3 bids, and all of a sudden the price came in. That's what we're supposed to do for you. And so so transportation budget is balanced. The big issues on transportation are GPS trackers. You can ask me about that if you want. I think we've effectively killed it. I'm not in favor of them tracking you with GPS transponders. There is an argument to be made that we need to adjust the way that we tax for transportation. But if you want to move off of a gas tax because you're saying our cars are getting more efficient or we are getting more electric cars in the workforce, I say fine, I can work with you on that. Here's my starting point. If we're going to pass any type of legislation to change the way we tax you, then fundamentally, I just offered 2 constitutional amendments. The first constitutional amendment says that the state will never employ any type of technology, either through the state or through a contracted resource, that will ever invade your privacy or track where you drive, period. Let's put that as a constitutional amendment, bind the state so that we never sell your data. That's number 1. And so I've laid it out there for the Democrats and for some members of the Republican Party to say, look, we need to set this basis, because if we don't, everyone's going to be concerned that you're going to be having your privacy invaded. And folks, let me tell you, it is scary what is happening in the IT realm, because Google and Facebook, Microsoft and Amazon, they want your personal data. And it has not been adjudicated at all in the country. We're the first state that's really the furthest down the path of trying to figure out. I mean, let me ask you by show of hands. How many of you think that your image belongs to you? Raise your hands. Okay. How many of you are not sure? Okay. So by default, let me ask you this. How many of you, the other answer is, how many of you think that your image belongs to Google to profit off? 2 people. Google to profit off. I mean, for example, if I came in here and had somebody walk in with a bunch of Shaquille O'Neal t-shirts and said that they're the authentically licensed product of the NBA, could I sell them to you? No, because I don't own the copyright to either 1, his image, or B, to the NBA trademark. But what we have now is we have a fundamental discussion as to who owns your image. Does Google and Facebook have the right to profit off of your image? And they believe that they do. Now, you might say to yourself, well, maybe I don't foresee an image, a way where I'm just, average Joe. They're not going to sell my picture. Well, here's how it works. And here's what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with you walk into a mall, and what used to be, I mean, look, we've got video cameras here. Well, that's really spoiled like a camera. Folks, that's not VHS anymore. That's digitized. Those images are digital. They're bits and bytes. It's no different than the words on this document. It can be searched. It can be indexed. It can be hashed. And they can search on it. So boom, you walk into a mall, they've got your picture. Who do you think wants access to that picture? JCPenney's does. All the stores does, the Bon Marché or Macy's or Nordstrom, they want that. What do they want to know? They want to, that image, the mall has a contract with data consolidators. They send the image over to them, the bits and bytes of your image. They search it. What do the data consolidators know? They've already bought from insurance companies, they've bought from the state agencies, they've bought from all sorts of private sector folks an image of you already. And then they also have your private financial data. And so what do? They index it, they find out who you are, and then they find out what maybe what your credit card is, what your purchasing history is. Who wants that? Well, Amazon wants to sell that. They want to make money. JCPenney wants to buy it from you. Why? Because theoretically, they now know that you're in the mall. And they want to know if Maureen here has potentially made any search attempts to buy something on Amazon, but didn't actually pull the trigger. So maybe 2 days ago, or last week, you were searching for a bed ensemble on Amazon, but you didn't buy it. That's valuable information. JCPenney wants to pay for that. They want to get it. Why? Because now through the data consolidators and this transaction, they can get your phone number, and within 5 minutes of walking in the mall, you get a text from JCPenney that says, hey, you come buy a bed ensemble from us today, we get 20% off. Does that make sense? That's how the commerce is working. But the question is, do they have a right to have your image and make profit off of it without your permission? That's the type of stuff that we're trying to do down there. It's a very interesting process. Now, that's not the sexy stuff you see on the news every day, but that's kind of the things that we're promoting. Okay, so we got through transportation. We're trying to protect your, by the way, the Department of Licensing right now is a major seller of your data. The state agency makes over $6 million a year selling your data. And anybody want to guess where they sell your data to, or who wants your information from the Department of Licensing?
To the credit companies.
Insurance companies. You got it right. Here's what they want. The Department of Licensing sells their data to a data consolidator like LexisNexis. They sell it. They get money for it. The insurance companies want to buy it. They want to know your PII, your personally identified information. And right now, under current federal laws mixed with state laws, you don't have any HIPAA protections over that. You should. But what do the insurance companies want to know? They want to know if you have a prescription eyeglass thing, or eyeglass prescription. Why? Because it's beneficial for the insurance companies to know that if you have a prescription and the Department of Licensing can confirm that for them, and then you make a claim, one of the things they want to check is whether or not you were wearing your eyeglasses that day. Because if you weren't, they're going to deny your claim. These are the types of things that we are hashing through on your behalf down there, and there's a lot of public lobbying and private sector lobbying going on behalf of whether or not your images are yours. Okay, so I talked about transportation, I talked about technology. Those are the issues that we've been doing so far. We've got operating budget. We have not seen the tax proposal yet, but we know that they've passed through through the Finance Committee, they've passed through a carbon tax. They've passed through a head tax, which is basically an income tax. They want to implement it at the county level, and they're trying to call it a head tax. They have they have passed through another B&O tax rate increase. Last year, you probably heard us talk about ghost bills. They ran another ghost bill through. Believe it or not, there was a bill that went through so fast through the legislature, you couldn't even blink and find it out. It got introduced in the Senate. 2 weeks later, it was already passed out of the Senate in the House. They passed it over us a week later, so in 3 weeks, the bill went through the entire process that we're down there for the entire session for, and the governor signed it into law. And you didn't even know about it. Why did they do this? Well, because last year they ran a ghost bill that effectively raised taxes under this paradigm. It literally said we're going to raise taxes on Medicare and Medicaid affected families. And we're going to give that money to fund free college tuition. And all you heard the press talk about was the state funding is starting to fund free college tuition. But never have I ever seen a politician say that we would fund that off the backs of the low and fixed income. And that's the bill they ran last year, it's 2158. And if you go back and you look at that, by the way, if you scroll all the way down, I don't know if this bill will have it. Actually, type in 2158 up there. Now, this also, so creating workforce education investment to train Washington students for Washington jobs. Nice title. Effectively, it is free college tuition. Okay, so scroll down. You can see how it went through the process. See how those are all filled in? Started in the House, went through committee on the floor, passed the chamber. By the way, that first full line, when it's all the way filled in, that means they made it out of the second quarter. The third quarter starts at the second line, and after we pass it out of the House, it has to go to the Senate. They have to do the same thing during Q3 and Q4, and ideally they got to pass it before we're done. And after it's passed the legislature, you get the third line, you get to the governor's action on the bill, whether he wants to veto part of it or all of it, and or sign it. And as you go down, you can see a bill history. I'll let someone ask me if they want me to go through bill history. I don't want to put you to sleep. So go down. Keeps going down all the way to the bottom, please. Say, no, keep going, a little bit. Okay, keep going. Those are all the 4 amendments we try to do to protect your taxes. You see all my amendments. Pass through my amendments. Keep going down. Right there. No, right. Just a little bit up right there. Available videos. Everything we do is recorded. After the bill is done, TVW goes out and they give you contextualized links to where you can see the bill as it processes through the process. And so, in the House Finance Committee on March 29th, you can see testimony where they brought this bill up so quick, the news media came in and asked for some consideration because they felt they were going to be pulled into the tax. I asked the lobbyists for the Allied Daily News networks, do you have any concerns with the fact that this bill is being passed so quickly without any of the traditional transparency rules in effect? And you can see what his answer is. He was very concerned about it. He admitted it on tape. They passed this bill so quickly that they screwed up the taxes. And so what they had to do this year was they quickly moved the bill through before the end of the month of January because they were worried about the effect on small businesses and how they were going to actually calculate their taxes on this. They realized that they passed such a quickly and hasty tax policy that businesses couldn't actually apply the tax, and then they were going to get fined. So they had to fix it. That's not the way that government is supposed to work. We're supposed to have transparency. We're supposed to have debate for a reason. You want Republicans checking Democrats, and you want Democrats checking Republicans. So that ideally the bill gets perfected enough so that you don't have to come back a year later and fix a mess without any transparency or the light of day. And so that's kind of how we've been dealing with some of these bills. And a lot of the tax policies that we're about to see implemented in the operating budget this year are around some of the bills that they passed around carbon tax. I'm really worried about them trying to pass that. That would raise their gas tax by over 57 cents overnight. The tax is going to go up. I don't think working Washington folks, your average day common worker can afford that tax. I really don't. I think that breaks the bank for a lot of people that are just stretching to try to make it to the end of the month to make their balance. And they're doing this, I think, with not a lot of transparency. That's where you see me talk about ghost bills. I think we need to end the practice of ghost bills. I don't think it honors you, and it certainly doesn't lead to a good governance scenario. Gosh, and if you're on one side of the aisle and it's benefiting you now, man, what we see historically in politics is ideally, or eventually the pendulum swings the other way. And if we don't fix it now, then the other side does it. And then it really ticks off the other side and ends up swinging back, and you get this pendulum swinging like this, and you never get any consistency and any real growth in revenue and the economy of the state that will ideally set the future up for our kids. And so I really worry about these types of paradigms where we say, well, because we can, we will. I think we're supposed to restrain ourselves a little bit and be a little bit more magnanimous in favor of the process so that we get a good product. And so with that, I promised you all I'd give you an hour. I have 5 minutes before, so we got an hour and 5 minutes left. I can answer any questions that you want to. I've covered a couple of budgets and taxes, but however you want this to go, I will go. So Christine's got the mic, and as long as just ask if you want her, let her hold it. And she will let you ask the question, and I will do my best to answer the question.
So thank you so much. That was a great recap. And now on to the question and answers. But first, ground rules. Just make sure, I just want to make sure we have a respectful interchange and dialogue at all times. And then as many people as we can already see want to ask questions. So let's limit it to around 30 seconds, your question, please. And then, let's see. All the rest are on the handout, so if you have any questions about the ground rules, just let us know. I saw Ben's hand first.
You can hold the mic for me? Thank you. I'll bend over. Thank you for coming here tonight. Everything that I do, my job, is about helping youth transition into the modern labor market. So I've been doing it for the last 15 years for the government, recently I've been to work for myself. And I was very excited when Governor Inslee signed some things to increase CTE trades vocational awareness in the schools. I was happy during the State of the Union address when the President made a similar sentiment. So we're seeing all of this sentiment. The problem is, last year I spoke to over 6,500 students. I was in 38 different school districts, and we're not seeing that down at the schools. We're still seeing college. All you kids need to go to college. Right now we are at 54% college graduate oversaturation in the labor market. We're 7.3 million workers short. in the trades, and that number's increasing. That's even happening locally. We've got the silver tsunami that's going to hit public works. It's going to hit a lot of the trades around here. They're going to lose up to 50% of their older workers because we don't have youth that are being presented with what a great future is in the trades. You said you sat on that. You sat on that committee. What do you say to that?
We'll get a timer. Thank you for the question. Okay, so did everybody hear it? Does anybody need anything clear? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I agree with you that CTE needs to be funded, and I was proud that the governor signed the bill. I was happy to help pass that bill out of the budget, and I got to tell you, oftentimes I am reticent to vote for an operating budget because I don't agree with all the priorities that the Democrats put in the bill. I'm a little bit more fiscally conservative than others. I voted for the budget because I believe in CTE. We put, I think it was over 19 million into it that year. Why is it not getting the prioritization that you want? Well, believe it or not, one of the interesting political things that I encountered when I got down to Olympia was that on the topic of education, it wasn't necessarily divided Republican and Democrat. It really wasn't. I kind of likened it to old school versus new school. And the people that were part of the new school team were a number of Democrats, and the head of that new school camp is now your current OSPI, your superintendent of public education, Chris Reipel. He was down in the legislature then. And I found it refreshing. He's a sharp guy. I like to work with him. I don't necessarily agree on the sex ed bill now. But in terms of the old school mentality that everything that is done through K through 12 needs to gear you towards a college degree, that's what the old school mantra was there. And you've had decades of law and regulation passed to try to enforce that type of paradigm. And so I think it was in 2015, the education bill came before us to fund it. And this was outside of McCleary, this is outside of anything else that we were dealing with back there, but it was fundamentally, how are we going to fund education? Are we going to accept the top-down mandates that were coming from the federal government that had strings attached to money that we could get? And ultimately that bill, very rarely in the House does a bill come to the floor, get potentially put up on the calendar to pass, and then not move. And that bill brought up, and it languished there for about 3 days, and they weren't moving it. And it was very interesting. What happened was there wasn't enough of the old guard left to force it through, and enough of the newer guards of both parties. Now keep in mind that the leadership in the House and the Republican caucus at the time was in favor with the leadership of the Democrats of passing that same type of paradigm bill. But enough of us were saying, we're not going to vote with that. We need to fund these trades. We need to give other alternatives and choices to kids. And so again, it wasn't an R&D type thing. It was very fascinating to me to watch this kind of happen. It was the first time I really saw such a divide that didn't cross party lines. And eventually what happened was Chris Reipel and a number of people from our side and some from his side got into a room and said, you know, we're kind of politically different on the spectrum, but if we can agree to a version of this bill that we like, I bet you everybody else would, because we're about far apart. So we basically, they went through a list, and they with the operating rule, said we'll take out anything that neither of us agree to. Got down to a list centered around CTE, and since then you start, and we passed that bill. The old guard was done at that point, new guard is in, but you've got decades worth of laws and regulations that we still got to unpack. You can't do it all at once, and the biggest hurdles to that right now are your credit mandates and the hour restrictions that are put on teachers. And then we've got a lot of reporting, and we've got 3 decades worth of reporting requirements on teachers. Are there any teachers in the room? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what would you tell me? Are you getting any benefit from the reports?
Well, I'm retired now, but
not really.
it was a lot of control. Taking away from the teacher's ability to match teaching what the class needs, and then a lot of demands on them as far as, okay, you got to cover this, you got to cover this, you got to report on this, and it's.
And I'll tell you, so can everybody hear what he said? Okay, so what we have found from the teachers has been you're killing our ability to be flexible. You're forcing us into a paradigm that doesn't allow us to accommodate little Joni that's excelling and little Jimmy that's maybe falling a little bit far behind. And I'm spending half of my time now filling out reports. And by the way, I never get the report back in time to actually make a change based off of it. And so if you add those factors up, that's where you're seeing up. South Kitsap here has, I think in the state, I think they have the notoriety for having the largest CTE offering in the state. It's a great program here in South Kitsap, but we need to get it duplicated elsewhere. But the truth is, until we come back and change the credit requirements so that kids can not risk not graduating by taking CTE classes. In other words, if they take a CTE class, they're going to get a full credit for something else. Until you do that and you start giving some of the time back to teachers, I don't think you're going to see it change as much, and that's one of the things I'm working on.
Okay.
Thanks.
Question right here? No, go ahead and hold it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is Randy Williams, and I was wondering, what would it take to limit property taxes for homeowners to the cost of their purchase price of their home, and with maybe a modest cost of living increase on that tied to maybe the minimum wage, some sort of ratio along those lines? And who would be the person or the level of state government that would make that happen?
Well, you're at the right level of government, so that's an easy one to answer. You know, the first part of your question, I was going to respond with by saying that you probably need to see a change in party in terms of who's the majority. But I'd be willing to talk with you afterwards. If you brought in the low income component of it, the poverty level, there might be a way to get some buy-in to it. I don't know that it fully gets there. Typically, the problem with this is that if you restrict what's going on with property taxes, then you hit a number of advocacy groups all at once that come down and seek to try to kill it. And the advocacy groups that do it, because you got to understand that there's not just one entity that taxes your property. You've got the city potentially passing some property tax. You've got the school districts potentially taxing some property tax. You've got fire departments. You've got the state. You've got potentially police. You've got different layerings of government that all come down, and they want that's where they get their bite at the apple. And so when someone makes a suggestion, say, well, let's try to, in your case, kind of reasonable if you think about it. Listen, if somebody's looking to buy a home, and I think I understand your argument, they're looking to buy a home and they're looking at the cost of the home now, and they can predict before they make the sale or before they commit to that property, they can kind of reasonably budget out off of today's dollars whether or not they can afford the taxes on it. But if the price keeps appreciating, if the county auditors come through and do a big whammy on you and jack the price up, the valuation up, because maybe developments happened surrounding you, all of a sudden your tax bill can go way up. So you're asking for a level of certainty there, and I think that's a reasonable thing to ask for. The problem is that all these different agencies want the appreciation to keep going up because they get more money, and they want more money. I would be willing to sponsor a bill that does something like that. So come talk to me afterwards, and we'll talk about that. I've sponsored a number of bills to reduce property taxes. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, the entire Republican caucus, if you don't know, we have a budget surplus right now. It just came in from the Q12 numbers. And it just was reported to us. We have a $2.5 billion surplus. Surplus. Money that's coming in that we did not anticipate to be there. So I would submit to you that raising taxes is the wrong way because we don't need it. We've already got the surplus. Let's spend that. Now, what I would suggest is why don't we make a compromise? So what the Republican caucus has done is that why don't we automatically right now just give $1 billion on the back?
Yeah.
That's our point number one. The second point that I'm advocating for is let's also throw into that $1 billion an additional property tax decrease. We don't need the money. We're already funding a lot of critical infrastructure. I already told you transportation budget's balanced. And I think a lot of people are getting unduly hit by the property taxes right now. And it's a result of a number of either Supreme Court rulings, the Cleary decision that we fixed, and a number of local levy options and auditor considerations that came in that have led to your property taxes really getting jacked up. And so we have $2.5 billion. The state has the ability to give you relief. And I would vote for that, and I've already co-sponsored bills to do that.
If there's that much of a surplus that nobody knew was going to be there, then doesn't that lead to the thought that people managing that money don't know what they're doing?
It does, doesn't it?
Spread the
It's a fair
word.
observation. I wish I could manage it for you. I only get to be a small part. We have some.
Question right here.
So my name is Bob Showers, and that was my question that you just brought up.
Okay.
Because I did know that you guys had a surplus.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was 2 point, I thought it was 1 point something. But my question is, now, if I'm understanding this right, on Tuesday, you guys are going to decide what you're going to do with those funds?
The budgets will come out on Tuesday for the
Okay.
operating budget.
So my thing is, my understanding is you're just going to spend it on something else. But it would be nice if you did give the taxpayer a break, because that is funds that actually was given into the state, but I haven't seen anything come out of there this year other than more taxes and no discount, no lowering taxes or anything for the taxpayer.
Yeah, it's our money.
I'm gonna find the bill for you really quick.
I just want more.
And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you the proposal that we just made. Stokesbury is our ranking member on appropriations, so he prime sponsors the bill. And let's see how many he's got here. Should be all the way at the bottom here. There it is. This is every member of the House. 2946 is $1 billion tax decrease that we're hoping to give you that money back. It's the start of the conversation. And
But that votes when?
that well. So have you been here the whole time? You saw me go?
You know, I'm sorry, I've got Little League tryouts tonight, and I got here, I was probably about 45 minutes late.
Okay, so then, what I would say is, we went through a whole description of how the bills go through.
Okay,
and-
that's fine.
And done it, and so this bill just got released 2 days ago. And so it has to go through the process. The first process it has to go to, which is where you see the mouse on the screen, is it's got to get a hearing in the committee. And if you like that, you're going to have to call the majority party, or in this case, the chair of the committee, and ask them to hear it. I think we should at least get a hearing on the bill, even if the majority party doesn't agree with giving $1 billion back. Let's have a discussion about it. I think with that much surplus, we should really consider that point of view and the perspective that you brought up.
Instead of spending it.
Instead of spending it,
Yeah.
yes.
And I did have another question, I can wait,
Yeah,
it's on the Second
Yeah,
Amendment, I can wait.
Just a
Yep.
minute here in this area.
Oregon, as liberal as it has a law that requires if there's additional revenues beyond budget, they are obligated to return it to the taxpayers, and they do it repeatedly. Can't we have a provision, something like that?
I would run that bill in a heartbeat. If you fund it, I'll tell you what, I'll make a note if you guys can, and I'll look at that, but you realize it's not going to get a hearing.
Yeah.
But I would sponsor that bill. I like that idea. I mean, keep in mind, I'm sponsor bills for a 2/3 constitutional majority to raise taxes. I think that the biggest concern I have with taxes is not that, I could care less about corporate carve-outs. I want to make sure that if we're going to raise taxes, that we've considered the fixed income person that's trying to stay in her home. And with the multi-layered form of taxation that we have in the state, and all the carve-outs we give for regional transportation districts or a park transportation district, if you throw all those in and then you throw the state on top of it, it really adds up, and it makes it hard on the average day person. And so that's why I favor a greater threshold to come through, because it helps perfect the bill better and make sure nobody gets left behind.
Question back there.
Hi, I'm Carol Johnson. My question is, why is it when I vote against a tax, Olympia passes it anyway?
That's a good question. Short and to the point, I appreciate it. Okay, so this is a legislative update, and I don't want to alienate anybody, but the real answer is we've had one party rule in the state for quite a long time, and I don't know that they're listening to folks. And the truth is, if I gave you a different paradigm or lens to look at it, I would say I'm not so sure that it's necessarily Republican and Democrat that's the divide that's causing this. What you've got is you've got a centrifugation of your legislative authority effectively in Seattle. And the legislators that are brand new, now think about it, I've only been in 7 years and I'm 13th in seniority. Think of what that means for turnover. Now it's on the Republican side. But on Democrat, I think I'd actually be higher in percentage of seniority if you brought in a Democrat caucus. There's been a ton of turnover. And that turnover has led to a kind of a new breed of legislator. And I'm seeing the default standpoint that comes in be much more adversarial and confrontational as opposed to, well, maybe why don't we go have a dinner together sometime and get to know each other. Maybe build a relationship and see if there's some common bonds that we can grow to. And my point in all that is saying this. Seattle has moved very far left, but they have a strong control, and especially King County, over the number of legislators that make up that body. And if you don't know, there's not a single Republican in King County. King County's gone all Democrat. And so you're not necessarily seeing a Republican and Democrat divide, you're seeing a Seattle, King County legislative priority being put over the rest of us because the rest of us are rural and we just need to get along with the show is kind of the mentality I'm seeing. And I don't think that that's productive. And unfortunately, that's where you're getting, I mean, keep in mind, we have $2.5 billion, but we've got multiple tax increases on the table right now. Why do we need to raise taxes again if we've got $2.5 billion surplus? I think that would be a clear sign. Let's give some of the money back. She sees you, she's going to come. But I think she would have her hand first.
Hi, thank you for giving us this opportunity to get to know you better.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the global increase in extreme weather events, hurricanes, droughts, wildfires, rates of glacial and polar melting, sea level rise, and ocean acidification that threaten human and animal habitat across the globe. What actions do you take personally and as a legislator to work to halt climate change?
Okay. It's a great question, and I appreciate it. And in an event like this, or an environment like this, it gives me a chance to kind of dive into some real specific examples. So what you probably don't know, part of climate change is they want carbon reduction. And because the concern is that the effect that carbon will have on us. So in 2015-16, I partnered with Democrat Strom Peterson. Now, if you remember back at the time, the Senate was controlled by the Republicans, or by the majority coalition, but effectively the Republicans. And Strom came to me. He was one of the Democrats that was willing to get to know somebody, and said, "Hey, Rep. Young, I've got an idea, and to address climate change, carbon, and more importantly, our groundwater, which goes into and has a ton of effect on our salmon runs, the runoff into the Sound." Orca populations and such. But his question was, I need somebody that can help me get it through the Senate. And for those that know my legislative history, I'm known as one of the most conservative guys in the state, probably the most conservative on Western Washington. And his thought was, well, geez, if I can find some way to work with you, maybe you can help me get it through the Senate. And so we partnered together. And we established PLIA, Pollution Liability Insurance Agency. And that bill has fundamentally changed and added massive protections for our groundwater. And it's had the largest effect on the West Coast of any legislation passed of reducing carbon down the West Coast since then. And it was so effective that not only, and so I was the #2 sponsor on that bill. So I co-sponsored it with the Democrat to help reduce carbon and to affect groundwater. But we wanted to extend it and add more, and so part of my contribution in this was to make the tax incentives right to support businesses. A secondary thing that we did in there, because Strom didn't serve on transportation, but I did, and I said, you know what, one of the problems we have towards moving towards a more energy efficient transportation infrastructure or usage of cars is that we don't have a lot of infrastructure in place to support electric cars. So we added a provision into the bill that incentivizes businesses, or in this case, small mom and pop grocery store owners that own gas stations. We give them tax-free loans to actually put in electric charging stations. And you're starting to see, and what it does is it's naturally growing out our infrastructure so that we can support a more green economy from transportation. So it was 3 tenants. it was so successful that we extended it again. Strom and I ran another bill to extend the environmental deal that we'd done in 15-16. We did that in 17 and 18, and what a lot of people don't know was that it was so successful, Governor Inslee made it one of his core components of his energy plan that he was pitching when he was running for president. I'm very proud of that. That's a way, I don't think a lot of people would assume that as a Republican conservative that I would be a leader on one of those issues. If you like, we can find the bill. I'll show you where I went through. We can do all that. But it is a concern for me. I'm doing a number of things. I've been working with the tribes now. We're trying to help our orcas in terms of making sure that they have enough food supply. Voted for a number of things from all places. A lot of boating issues come into transportation. So we've been doing a lot to not only protect our orcas from transportation with regard to boating, but also fuel. We have enacted a lot of restrictions on pilotage in the Puget Sound. And for those of you that don't know, it's actually a mistake one time. I was so brand new. Some of my legislative aide told me at the time, hey, the Puget Sound pilots want me to do that. I thought I was going to go meet with a bunch of airline pilots. No, it was that, if you don't know, we've had some limited restrictions at the time that when major vessels are crossing the Pacific and they want to come into the Puget Sound, they have to stop at Port Angeles. And we have rules about making sure that they know how to actually navigate the Puget Sound waters. And we've strengthened provisions around that. It was a strong union bill that I supported as well to increase the local pilotage restrictions to make sure that if you're coming down and you're going to bring those major vessels down here, that we've got experienced pilots, in this case, ship captains, that are piloting those boats to make sure that we don't have an accident that spills something into our Puget Sound. So I've been doing a lot of issues around that, both with carbon reduction, groundwater, and Puget Sound, and I'm proud of that right now. So thanks for asking.
3 things really quick. There's a sign-in book. Please, 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 we put it out a bit late, but before you leave, please show us who's here tonight. There's cookies. And then, I was going to do this at the end, but look at that beautiful family back there. Jesse's family is all here. Can you say your names really quick?
I'm Joseph. Angela. Jenny. I'm Ezekiel, but I'm not his son.
He wants to date my daughter. How many of you think I should Ezekiel, I don't see any hands going up, man.
I'm Lucy.
Lucy, the daughter.
Two of our kids are, we got baby Jacob right there too.
Baby Jacob.
Really
How old is
excited about his
Jacob?
first town hall.
6 months.
6 months old. New life, beautiful. We have a question right here.
Hi, Representative Young. I met you last week while lobbying in Olympia on the floor. As a constituent, I have a question for you. I told you last week that I do read and do my research. So my question is a little bit personal. I'd like to know what your personal and your professional relationship is with Representative Matt Shaw.
Matt Shea?
Shay,
Oh,
sorry.
she's got my phone. I can't. Well, first off, you saw that I voted for the bills. I told you I was going to vote, and I kept my word, yes?
Thank you for 1888, yes.
You're welcome. That was, I feel, I don't like some of the bills that come down here that are generally hostile to your industry. I'm not ducking your question. I just want to also note that I kept my word and voted the way, that wasn't necessarily the way Republicans voted. So another bipartisan vote I took with the Democrat Party. My personal relationship with Matt Shea is I've known him since I've been down there. And everybody know the context of the question?
Yes.
How many people don't know who Matt Shea is or maybe the backstory for why that question would be asked? Okay. So Representative Matt Shea was, there was a investigation that was done over the summer over Representative Matt Shea. An allegation was made that he was doing illegal activity and potentially committing acts of domestic terrorism. And that study was concluded in late fall, maybe I think it was announced in December. And it came back and it alleged that he did in fact commit acts of domestic terrorism. And the study that was done, there's a lot of us that have some real big problems and concerns with the study, because the study was done by a group that is a major Democrat donor to Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin. And in this case, due process has not been afforded. And regardless of my decision or my relationship with Matt Shea, I'll tell you that I'm always going to stand up for due process and constitutional rights. And he has a right to defend himself. See your hands, we'll get you. So now in this case, he's been accused of it. But the FBI is refusing to file any charges. That's very interesting. Now, what the concern was over was, how many of you remember the Bundy Ranch standoff from a few years ago? Okay, so Representative Shea went down to the Bundy Ranch, and that was one of the things that they said he was a domestic terrorist for. Of course, if you have watched what happened in the courts, every member of the Bundy family and everybody that went down there was vindicated and acquitted from any charges of domestic terrorism. And the courts came back and said that the Department of Land Management, or whatever the acronym is for it, was wrong. And so they've been all vindicated, but they've said, well, because Shea was down there, that's one act of domestic terrorism. I don't agree with that. Secondarily, there was another issue in Idaho, and then the one that really led to the accusation was when the Bundys were still going through the process, one of their sons took over that Molar Reserve in Oregon. Does anybody remember that one? Yeah. Okay. And so, how do you say it? Mallard. Okay. Thank you, Steve. And so here's what people don't know, and this is why, if you saw and if you've seen me, I came out with a statement of unity that I suggested to the Republican Party, because when the accusation was made, our party, or the Republican Party leadership, suspended Representative Shea from the caucus until this thing has a chance to work itself out. And he either gets his day in court, or he's vindicated, or he's convicted. And I agreed with leadership's stance on that. I did not agree with the stance that Representative Shea should resign. I think he should have his day in court. But I, of course, do things that other people didn't. And the accusations from the report that came back said that Representative Shea, and of the two events, the event that happened in Idaho and the Bundy Ranch, they said that was concerning, but the real act that he did was during the Mallard Reserve. And they said that he was conspiring against the FBI and helping them. But here's what nobody knows. I've said it on air, and I don't know why the media's not putting it out there more. But that was happening while we were in session, whatever year it was now, probably 17, 18, I cannot remember. Do you remember? 16, okay, great. So 16, we were in session. And because Representative Shea is on the east side and he has a lot of connections with a lot of these types of groups, and because he'd been down to Bundy Ranch in the previous episode, he had a lot of connections. And when they hold themselves into that reserve, and then you compound it with the fact that LaVoy Finnegan was killed during one of the standoffs, when remember the car goes off the side of the road and everything, and when all that happened, that had a very strong likelihood of spiraling out of control. And what you guys don't know, what I've said on the radio, and I'm sick and tired of the media not reporting it, was who did the FBI call to help ease the tensions and get a breakthrough? The FBI called Representative Shea. And Representative Shea was excused from caucus, was excused from floor activities, would go into leadership offices, and he negotiated the stand-in. Yet this non-bipartisan report that was done by a Democrat donor comes back and says that he was guilty of domestic terrorism against the FBI. And so I ask you, do you think the FBI is ever going to charge him? They won't. He was the guy that talked the stand down. And especially after LaVoy Finnegan was killed, those guys they were going to pull up there and say, come get us. Representative Shea is the one that negotiated that, and the media will not report that. And here I am saying it. It's on camera. It's on camera here. I had numerous interviews on the radio when I think I was the first Republican to come out, kind of big in the press and say he deserves his day in court. Now keep in mind what I'm saying. I said he deserves his day in court. I didn't say that he should just be whitewashed and vindicated and set back in. But I believe that what you will find is that the FBI will not indict him. They will not file any suits against him, and he'll be vindicated, because what he deserves is a pat on the back for de-escalating that scenario, not be considered a domestic terrorist. And so that's my relationship with Representative Shea. And by the way, Representative Shea is acknowledged around the country. Lots of legislative bodies from other states are constantly, well, before this, but have been constantly, they request Representative Shea come talk to them about constitutional principles constitutional legalities because he's a constitutional lawyer. He has a very stout reputation in that regard. And it's unfortunate that he's going through this, but I think once he's had this due process, this will all work out. I'm just advocating that he gets it. So.
Hi, turning the conversation to one of your prime objectives, and that's affordable housing. Okay. My name's Tom. I'm a retired builder. I've been working in the county here trying to find solutions to affordable housing in the homeless situation.
Yeah.
And the main problem is land and zoning. Okay. California governor in his State of the State just 2 days ago announced that they're giving like over 600 state properties to local governments to do homeless applications and other things like that. Okay. In regards to affordable housing, though, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not an expert on all the county rules and laws, is that the state requires the counties to do high density within cities and then low density outside. Okay? Everybody knows that the cheap land, okay, is outside the city, but it doesn't do you any good if it's 1 unit per 20 acres. Okay? You need 20 units per acre. Okay? And so that's holding up a lot of builders that would love to build really inexpensive stuff, and they can't because the zoning isn't.
Yes. Okay. Well, I first off, let me just say I agree with you. Does everybody know if I say the GMA, does everybody know to what I'm referring? Anybody not? Should I give the definition?
What's the name? Go ahead.
Growth Management Act. Now, a lot of people don't know that the Growth Management Act was twice attempted to pass by initiative at statewide level, and twice the Growth Management Act was voted down by the people of Washington. And the Growth Management Act, I guess at a very broad level, was to basically say, let's get a body of people together and basically out of Seattle, and let's regulate a growth plan for the state, and it's very Seattle-centric. And then they enforce these rules on all the rural counties and everybody else. So when I was talking before about how you've seen a centrification of Seattle-based policies being enforced on the rest of the state, this is one of the problems because it also affects the zoning rules that you're referring to, and ultimately the cost of construction and housing. And in this case, so after it failed twice, after that last election, the Democrats came back into a supermajority, and then they immediately passed the initiative into law. And it's been there for about 20 years now. And it's had a lot of negative consequences. So, anybody in favor of tiny homes and tiny houses that you see in the media? I see a couple of hands go up. I don't have a problem. The average cost per square foot, we had this debate on the floor a couple of years ago, and our minority leader at the time is a contract builder, and his company specifically focuses on Bill Gates style houses. You know, for the uber rich, the type of contracts that are built with, you know, secret contracts and exclusivity and privacy for mega wealthy people. And we had a number of other contractors in our caucus, and while we were debating some regulatory changes we were trying to get to the GMA to actually free up supply for housing, these stats were presented on the floor of the House. The average cost per square foot of an ordinary home is about $130 a square foot. And then Representative Christensen stood up, our minority leader, and said, for his homes, the Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos style homes, the average cost per square foot equates to about $350 a square foot. Yeah, that makes sense, and it's a more expensive home. A lot of cool features, I guess, they put in there, more probably expensive property, blah, whatever. But the cost of constructions and the regulatory stuff, $350. Anybody want to guess, under the current regulatory scheme that we have, how much we're paying per square foot for a tiny home?
$1,000.
$430 a square foot. It's more than the expensive homes.
Oh.
And that speaks to another problem that we have. And I'm all for tiny homes, but I'd sure like, especially, they're not getting the amenities that Bill Gates is getting in his house, so why is the cost so much? And more importantly, how are we ever going to get ahead of the curve? Now, the solution, I would say, is we need to allow for regional flexibility with regard to the GMA. Either let counties opt out or let them have differences of zoning outside of what Seattle and the board of the GMA would say. And the fundamental problem that you're seeing is that there's a different solution being proposed by the Democrats than there is with Republicans. Republicans want to affect the supply side. We want to open up regulation, let contractors go out, get inexpensive land, put some reasonably dense home housing on it. And you used to see this back in the 80s. We had lots of manufactured home parks. And the cost per square foot is dramatically lower than the average cost. And therefore you get a home that's reasonably priced, has some pretty good amenities. It's using economies of scale because of the manufactured, pre-manufactured status of it. Now I gotta tell you though, as a poor kid, Mom and me, you got married to Mark. I had a stepdad for a while, and Mark's parents, who became my grandma and grandfather-in-law, or I guess step-granddad, they lived in a mobile home park in East Bremerton. And I remember driving from Tacoma, from one of our apartments that we ended up bouncing around through, and we would go there for holidays and such, and it was a double-wide mobile home. And I gotta tell you, as a poor kid, I thought that place was a palace relative to what I had. Why can't we go back to that for low income? Instead of forcing people into a tiny home that costs quadruple the amount as an average home in terms of costs. And I think the way the Democrats want to solve it is they don't want to open up the rural areas where the land is cheaper for urban sprawl. They want to keep everybody into the dense areas. The problem is property is much more expensive, the regulations are much higher, and therefore the cost is exorbitant. And we keep wondering why we can't solve this housing crisis, which is leading to greater homelessness and making it less affordable for the average worker to make it happen. We believe on the Republican side the solution is to increase supply, which will bring down the costs, and increase or decrease regulation over it, which will also bring down the costs of building it. The other side wants to go with, say, things like, rent control. And I don't think that works. It's proven not to work. And what it does is it leads to the biggest problem with rent control or some of these other paradigms is that it leads to a corporatization of the supply of low-income housing. And right now what you have is you have a lot of the stock of housing that will be available for folks is owned by individuals. Someone that has saved up and bought an extra house, and so they rent it out as a supplementary source of income. Your individual property owners that own houses that they didn't rent and make available to low-income or fixed-income folks at a reasonable price are your most generous people to deal with. All the problems that we hear about in Olympia deal with people that are in a low-income situation, maybe renting in a scenario where they're renting from a massive corporation that has thousands and thousands of units and don't look at them as a person per se, they look at them as a line item on a balance sheet. And the more and more we go towards a system where you start forcing rent control, what happens? The people that own those properties either sell them to somebody that wants to own it, and therefore you've taken it out of the market in terms of rental property, which decreases supply. Or they end up having to move into that house themselves. Either way, you've lost the supply. And I don't think that that's the right way to go. I think we need to increase supply. So I agree with you that we need regional flexibility. I think it would dramatically drive down the costs, and you'd see us be able to get ahead of this scenario.
And so how do you accomplish that?
Well, we sponsor bills to do that, but they don't get hearings under the current leadership of the Democrat Party.
So what I'm doing is going from corner to corner, if that's okay.
I've seen a lot of people over here waiting for a while, so why don't we give them, and he's waiting too, so why don't we go there?
He was going to be my next question right here, because he's been waiting.
Oh. Folks, I'll stay all night. Hey, before you ask a question, if I can get through questions quicker if I am more brief. Is the pace of discussion I'm giving you too long, or would you like me to make it more brief?
A little more brief.
Okay, I'll give you more brief. Here we go.
Hello, my name is Byron LaPlante. I have a few environmental concerns.
Yeah.
There's a lot of current day issues that we're addressing, and I honestly think that anything worth doing is worth doing well. So with all of this low-income accommodation and that sort of thing, what are we doing to protect our communities and the beauty that they possess or the potential that they have as far as maintaining aesthetic standards and not ending up with a place full of Soviet slap-ups of plastic windows and that sort of thing? And then as far as promoting electric vehicles and that sort of thing, The carbon cycle, it's a natural cycle. Carbon is a product of the earth and goes back to earth and it cycles through. Are there any initiatives towards promoting these electric vehicles as far as maintaining their e-waste, the old batteries, their planned obsolescence? Because lots of these other countries are taking our waste, and eventually we will be having to deal with that. So are we doing anything in these two subjects?
You said lots of countries are what?
They're not taking our recycling. I've been permitted to believe from articles that, they're taking less of our junk. So we will have to deal with that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. With regard to aesthetics and with regard to the way the communities develop that, trust me, you don't want the state dealing with that. That's what you elect your county councilors for. That's what you elect your city councils, and that's where you find most of your codes and regulations on that. And that differs by county, but believe it or not, counties and cities are some of the biggest lobbyists in Olympia, if you didn't know that. Mayor Thompson's already left, but they hire a lobbyist to come lobby me, just like the city of Gig Harbor does. And they desperately want to have their flexibility to legislate that. So that's where those codes are maintained. And I don't know that it would be a better model if we took that local control away, because they're closer to you and you have more of an opportunity to meet with Mayor Patonsu or the city council here and ask for a change if you see one. So that's the answer there. You don't want us legislating top down. I don't think it would happen though, by the way. I don't think the legislature would pass that. Fundamentally, the way the state constitution works is the power starts with us at the top. It's fundamentally reversed from the federal constitution, where the federal constitution says that the power starts with the people and only the enumerated things can the federal government do. The state constitution starts with the opposite belief. Everything is the purview of the state government, and then we can give permission to lower levels of, or lower layers of municipal control. And so it's been this way for a while, where we've given that control or ceded it to the local level. And so that's where you'd advocate for that. With regard to the carbon cycle, it is a natural cycle, I would agree with you. The second part with regard to batteries or building out the electrification, I already gave you an example of how we're building out. We're using market metrics and tax incentives to get the private sector to come along with us. And we're further along in our electrification in terms of infrastructure that would support people buying those cars than a lot of other states. And our ratio is better than California. California started before us, so their numbers are bigger. But in terms of the ratio and build out, we're actually exceeding them now because of the free market economy principles that we use there. In terms of the battery problem, that is a major problem. Some of the other governments aren't wanting to take the waste. I fundamentally believe the breakthrough that we need to see in innovation to really get this over the hurdle is in battery innovation. The problem is, I would like for us to develop that technology here in the United States, not over in China or in India or someone else. That innovation, the first nation that gets that right is going to have a major technology boom all to themselves. And so one of the things that we've done in this state is we've supported tax incentives and policy, regulatory policy, to try to build that out and encourage local battery producers and technology firms and so forth to operate and be competitive. So we've drastically reduced their B&O rates because we know that China's trying to undercut it by not taxing anybody over there. And what we get is we get a lot of lobbyists representing Chinese firms that try to come over here and dump their product on us, and then you're right, they won't take the waste back. They also don't build those batteries environmentally sound. So under the rules that we have here, not only are we getting the batteries produced correctly in terms of environmental policy, which I support, but we're also trying to get them stood up so that they can compete, and ideally we get the breakthrough here. And there's a lot of layers of other things there, but you asked me to be brief, so I think I got your question. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for coming here, and I looked up some information on Matt Shea in response to this.
Yeah.
And it said on the Spokesman Review, which is a pretty conservative paper, it said that in newly leaked emails first reported by The Guardian, as well as a video on Shea's public Facebook, revealed that he had close ties with a group called Team Rugged that trained children, teens, and men in their early 20s for religious combat. And it was to, and the leader wrote to Shea, and they found this, and quote, everything about this group is politically incorrect and what would be considered to be shocking truth to most Christians. There will be a scenario where every participant will have to fight against one of the most barbaric enemies that are invading our country, Muslim terrorists.
So your question?
So that, I just want to say, it wasn't just the Malwar, it was also.
Well, so that particular instance there too is also documented in the 109-page report. I read the entire thing. And after they listed that article and a bunch of other articles, Representative Shea represents a very Eastern Washington, very conservative district. And he has lots of people that come up to him from all walks of life that engage with him. And what they said about that particular instance and every other instance except the Malwar one, which I gave you context for, is they said after they reviewed every one of them, it's in the report, and this was written by a Democrat sponsor, they said he did absolutely nothing illegal. That's what the report said. The only thing that they recommended him to the FBI for was the Malwar incident, which I already gave you backdrop to. He was actually helping the FBI in that instance. And I know that because I was there. Or, I was in the legislature when he was given a chance to go out and do the negotiations with him. Every one of us do that. And as a matter of fact, the new speaker, Representative Jenkins, knows that as well. What you don't know in terms of backdrop on this is when Representative Jenkins became the new speaker designate over the summer, what you don't know is that she has a very hostile relationship with Representative Shea.
That's not true.
It is true. Representative Shea was her counterpart on the Judiciary Committee. And Representative Jenkins served on the Judiciary Committee for a very long time. And Representative Shea was her counterpart. And they were constantly battling on, bills that came through that committee. They don't have a great relationship. What I would suggest,
The fact
though,
is that he had done this, he was part of it. It doesn't take away from the facts.
okay, so you're saying that a newspaper wrote that he had politically incorrect associations that they don't agree with, that a Democrat-led investigation came back and said he had done nothing illegal with. So where should he be convicted of?
He wasn't convicted, but
That's my point.
But the Republican caucus are the ones who really chastised him.
No, I'm part of the Republican caucus, and we suspended him from caucus
Yes.
until, which I supported. Okay, you hear that? I supported it until he has his due process. And he's going through his due process right now.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Question right here.
Thanks, Jesse, for coming. When the federal constitution was written, there was a very big concern about mob rule. The state constitution here, the Senate and congressional and legislative districts are based on population. So the counties don't have the say that they would typically get. In order to turn around GMA and other issues that the more rural people are concerned about, we really need to change the way we govern more to a republic than a democracy. Democracies are mob rule. That's what you're seeing that there's concern about Seattle. Your thoughts?
So, just a brief moment ago, I explained the difference between how the federal constitution was written and where it instantiated powers and how it did it versus the state constitution. I don't think you'll ever see that change come about because it would require a fundamental rewrite of the state constitution. And in this case, when I come to office, I took an oath to the state constitution as well as the federal constitution. I agree with you. If the model were to mimic the federal level, your counties would be equivalent to states. And then if you haven't noticed, the only difference in our local legislative district between a senator and a representative is the number of years we serve. That's it. At the federal level, the equivalent would be that maybe a state senator would be elected countywide. But as it is, the state senators and the state representatives are elected by the exact same constituency, and the only difference is the term that we serve and the body in which we serve. And yeah, you get more of a non-U.S. government-centric form of implementation here. And yeah, you're using mob rule, and it's much more democratic. And one of the problems that you see with the more democratic as opposed to Republican form of government is you get a lot more of simple majority decisions. And when you, ma'am, earlier tonight asked about, well, why can't we do anything? Well, one of the problems is we don't have as many safeguards to protect that. At the U.S. level, you've got to have greater majorities. And the Senate is fundamentally different than the House. And you've got to, the original intention of the U.S. Constitution for the election of senators. Now, if you don't remember, I mean, U.S. senators used to not be elected by the population. They used to be elected by the legislature. Members like me would elect our U.S. senators. And the reason why we were supposed to elect U.S. senators is because U.S. senators were never meant to represent people. They were meant to represent the state's interest. And in your case, when you try to relate to the GMA, if we were to have a governance style that had senators elected maybe by your local county councils and maybe a group of your city councils or something within that county, then you would get ideally what you would see elected if it was the combination of, say, Mayor Patonsu and Mayor, all the mayors in their district. I'm dropping their names right now. What is it? Wheeler, yes, Wheeler. And then Kit Coon down in Gig Harbor, lots of different counties now. So now we got a split district, but ideally we may not have that at the level. So you'd see a fundamental shift, but you would see electors that are represented to represent the county. We don't have that right now, and that's why you've got your county commissioners that, believe it or not, the city of Gig Harbor and actually the city of Port Orchard hire the same lobbyists to represent them. Bremerton hires a different lobbyist, and in your county council, Kitsap County, hires still another lobbyist, and they all come down and they lobby us. I don't know that that's the best way to do it, but that's the system we have. But thanks for answering your question. Yeah, GMA.
30 seconds.
I'm going to make this really easy. One, when we're talking about affordable housing for the lower income, I'd ask that you look hard before you support government-funded low-income housing. And why I'm saying that is we were talking about the square footage. And the 130 for one-year contractors or something around there. But if you understand that Bay Vista costs us over $600 a square foot, I think we could actually look at things like Spyglass that was put in Bremerton. I don't think it came even close to that cost per square foot. And maybe the model is more that we ask the contractors to build this before we send it over to the other side.
Thank you.
The second one is the voter envelopes, the Democrat and the Republican.
Listen, you haven't had your question yet, right? We'll come to you next. Okay, how about this? I agree, I don't think that government should be doing the private sector's job for them. I would much rather prefer, and since I talked about this at length, if you don't mind, I'll be brief with this, and that is, I would much rather prefer that we free up regulatory regulations and policy to increase supply and allow builders to start building elsewhere instead of having government do it for us, because $600 a square foot is egregious. So, thank you.
Okay, 30 seconds. I have a Toyota Prius. I got additional taxes this last year for my licensing, and I'm upset because I feel like I'm getting penalized for having a high-efficiency car. What is your opinion?
Well, yeah, that's one of the big concerns we have. It's not an easy answer because there's a strong contingent of legislators, especially coming out of Seattle, that say, well, it's not fair because if you're not paying for gas, then you're not paying for the roads and we need to tax you. So they're coming up with the easy fix for that was to them to throw extra registration fees on you. I don't know that that's the best example. If you really want to fix it, you would go to a vehicle miles traveled. But as I led with, the way that they want to implement a vehicle miles traveled is to put GPS transponders on your car. That's fundamentally a no-go with me. I don't think that's a major invasion of your Fourth Amendment rights and privacy. So that's why I've offered to the legislature this proposal to say, let's pass a constitutional amendment that takes off privacy rights as an issue. And then what that would do is open us up for a robust discussion on not trying to cherry pick little fees that we put on you as an individual car owner that's maybe making what you believe is an environmentally sound decision. I don't think we should be penalizing you because of that. I think what we could do is then have a robust discussion on the proper way to tax. That's how I will do that. Who's next? Oh,
okay, let's see. Hi, Jesse and Greg. So I'm a fisherman, sport fisherman. And you know about the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife putting forth a budget asking for a certain amount of money. So
As a sport fisherman, what a lot of people are voicing is that the transparency in the department hasn't been what it should be. One example would be 20 years ago, we, the sportsmen, lobbied fisheries that will pay $10 more for an enhanced license for blackmouth in the Sound. That money slowly was absorbed into the budget, and then the blackmouth program went bye-bye. So now they're asking for $26 million. I'm for the 15% increase in the license. I can see that. But they want a yearly budget that is automatic. And what people are worried about is with that automatic budget, just like you see in a lot of government entities, ex-government, that there's no accountability. So where do you stand on that?
So a couple points there. I would say fundamentally that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is not nearly as transparent as it needs to be. I would favor greater accountability. One of the things that we're seeing is a lot of the executive branch agencies are not responding to the legislative oversight the way that they should. And one of the ways that you change that is through budgetary things. Now, in transportation, it's easy for me to do that with the transportation because we deal with policy and budget in the same committee. And so what these agencies are now finding is that if you don't do what we told you to do, we take your money. The problem with the transparency there is you have a different committee that deals with policy over the Fish and Wildlife, and then you have the appropriations department that doesn't deal with policy, and so necessarily isn't seeing that they're not being transparent, but is still funding their budget requests. And so the number one change there is they got to start pulling in the purse strings on them, or we got to pass policy laws, which I would support, to bring in greater transparency. So I got a problem there. Agree with you on that. The second part of, what was the second part of your question?
Are they going to support that budget where they want $26 million?
It's very unlikely I'm supporting the operating budget this year. And the easy answer for that is because I believe they're going to infer one of those tax increases, and any tax increase I'm not voting for when we've got a $2.5 billion surplus.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that's where I stand. As the particulars of that, I got to see the line items for the Fish and Wildlife. Once the budget comes out, I'll be able to take a look at it. That's one of the problems with the way the budget is written right now, is it's done in secret. So we don't see it as legislators until, and if we're not in executive party leadership on that committee, you don't see the budget negotiations. I think that needs to be a much more transparent process so that you have the ability, or anybody in the room has the ability to start digging into it and then coming back and saying whether or not I actually am supporting it or not, so that you can affect the change. But what they do is they race to the end. They wait to the end of the session, they drop the budget really late, and you get like 3 or 4 days to look at it, and then they ask us to vote on it. And it's a 1,000-page budget. That's the wrong way to do that. And I've advocated for that for years, that we need a fundamental policy change. I think we should have 4 budgets, not 3. I think education should be its own thing, since we're mandated by the Constitution to prioritize them. And then I think we should pass that one up front, and then have a separate budget committee that just deals with the operating budget, which would then give them greater clarity and focus on that particular issue. So that's how I would handle that. The other thing that I would say is the carve-outs for the fees that they put on you. I think we should have a constitutional amendment or I would enact a House rule that says you cannot strip fees. What they try to do down there, and what we've seen a lot is they'll pass a particular fee on a particular group. In this case, it could be fishermen, it could be snowmobilers, it could be any particular group that wants to have a fee enacted upon themselves to fund an area of governance that would help their industry. And then, so it gets passed because it's initially very specific. And then what happens? The Appropriations Committee, after a couple of years, after that fee's been in place, they strip it out and they put it back in general government or general budget, and then you're stuck without the fee benefit that you would have otherwise got. So I would enact that rule.
2 more questions
Sure.
I know of really quick here. Your second one.
21st century jobs, that's a Jesse Young slogan, it's on your signs.
Yeah.
To me, that means a job that has a livable wage, gives people some benefits and opportunity to retire with some dignity. But in the past, you have voted against equal pay for women, you voted against paid family leave, you voted to support legislation that supports right to work initiatives that diminish the ability of labor unions to negotiate fair contracts for their members. And so it feels like you and I maybe have a different vision of what a 21st century job is, and I'd like to understand what yours is and what you're doing to create those.
My definition of a 21st century job would be that something that you can earn at least 6 figures from, and at today's market rate that would follow it up regardless of what inflation happens. It'd be an economy that would give you the ability as an employee that if you don't like your employer, that you could move to another job and keep the same wage, or move to it because your skill sets are so high. And the only way to affect that is to have more businesses come in here that are offering those jobs to you so that you can move laterally. One of the things that we've seen, especially in corporate America, but in a growing economy, is that the best way for employees to increase their wages is to not necessarily sit in the pipeline of an individual company and hope at the company's grace to move up. And what we see is that when you enact policies that attempt to force that company to pay you more and move up the ladder, they either close down, they lay off workforce and then pay a few people a little bit more, or they leave the state. What I would prefer is a scenario that would allow you to say, you're not paying me enough, but because the economic scenario in the state is so robust that you're going to go over here, they're going to pay me more. And then after that company starts to realize what they've missed by not having you there anymore, and the skill and labor that you, and expertise that you brought to the table, all of a sudden they call you back up and say, hey, you know what? We were wrong. We should have given you that raise. We should have kept you. So we'd like to have you back. And then your first response to them will be, well, I'm not going to come back at the same rate. And more importantly, I'm not going to come back at the rate that I'm currently getting paid. You want me back, you're going to pay me even more. That's 21st century jobs where it puts you as the employee in an empowered position. And I don't believe that trying to force businesses into a paradigm that says this is how you will pay people works for that scenario, because invariably it makes them flee the state. And if they flee the state, then you don't have that job opportunity to begin with. So I favor greater market dynamics that attract those jobs here so that you have more options and you're not stuck at the behest of a single employer. We'll come back.
I'm sorry, you said raise your hand if you thought if we thought you weren't answering.
Oh, you don't think I'm answering the question? Okay.
Yeah, I don't understand what you are supporting in order to do that.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Well, I've supported, in terms of green economy, I've supported tax incentives that bring those types of green technology jobs to the state by lowering their B&O tax rate. I've supported innovation partnership zones that attract IT companies to bring them up here and get them out in California. That's been a major initiative of mine in the state, because we see in California, those jobs are fleeing the market. What you just referred to in terms of a regulatory cycle, specifically, is there anybody in here that would disagree with me that IT jobs are going to be some of the more higher paying jobs of the future? Yeah. Okay. So in Silicon Valley, these jobs are very high paying, whether they're at Google, Oracle, Apple, doesn't matter. And a lot of these companies operate on a very cyclical production cycle. They get a major budget initiative to create a brand new product. They ramp up all the developers, they hire consultants, they hire more employees, and they fund that project, and it might be on a year, 2-year, 5-year cycle. And so an easy way to understand that would be Apple wants to come out with, what's the iPhone number now? 11. Okay, so now they're going to be considering a budget cycle for the iPhone 12. And once they get that budget approved, they're going to ramp up for it, and they're going to hire a lot more people to try to code in all the features that are going to go into the iPhone 12. And what happens when they're done with that project? The project's done, the budget's over, it's been spent, and so they start to lay some of those developers and those contractors off until the next cycle comes. And what California said was, well, we don't want that. We don't want you to lay these contractors off. Now keep in mind, these contractors, if you're a contractor like me, in that, well, I'm not going to say it that way, you get paid a lot of money if you're good at what you do down in that market, especially if you're a contractor, because you're willing to take the risk of the cycle in exchange for the fee that you charge them for them to have your intellectual capital and expertise. Now, what California came back and said, we don't want that. And so they've effectively, over the past decade, put in place these regulatory laws that say you can't lay people off. They don't want this cycle like this of employment and unemployment. And by the way, if Apple gets done with that project, guess who hires them next? Samsung does. They say, well, shoot, they just built all the functionality on the iPhone. I want them to build it on my Android phone. And so these guys bounce back and forth. The market dynamics.
Okay, so go back to what you're doing.
Okay, so What they've done is they put regulations that try to make so that scenario can't happen. So what we've done with regulations is say, we're open for businesses. We don't put that regulation on you. Come up here. Invest in your workforce up here. And here's a big initiative that you've seen happen. Of one of the biggest IT companies in California is Kaiser Permanente. And what did you see as a result of a lot of our laws? Kaiser Permanente finally moved up into the market up here. And they bought out Group Health, and they've expanded massively. And these are high-paying jobs. These are the types of jobs that they wouldn't have moved into the market with if we had to pass tax incentives to incent them here.
Did they lay them off?
I just told you, Kaiser's massively grown.
Okay, but you were, okay. Right. I don't keep going.
8:30?
We had one more question, I think. I'm willing to stay, if you're willing to stay. I don't want to squash the conversation.
Thank you, Representative Young, for being here tonight. We really appreciate that opportunity. My name is Angie Valley. My question is, what is your stance on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines? And why do you have that stance? And Second Amendment can't be your answer.
The answer, so you asked about assault weapons and magazines, and then you said don't talk about the Second Amendment or don't give that as the answer.
Correct.
Okay.
But you should ask her what is her functional definition of assault weapons and magazines.
That's exactly the question I was going to ask.
I have what I have for assault weapon. Assault weapon drawing from federal and state law definitions. The term assault weapon refers primarily to semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and shotguns that are able to accept detachable magazines and possess one or more other features. A semi-automatic firearm capable of accepting a detachable magazine.
Okay, so that effectively,
That's everything.
okay, so let me ask you another question, if you don't mind. It's an honest question.
Take human life.
In that definition that you just read, do you think that should preclude me from carrying a sidearm as a concealed weapon, a small pistol? Would that be your intent?
No, I'm mostly concerned about, I understand, I'm not a big gun supporter, but I understand people who hunt, and I do sort of understand a handgun. But I don't understand, an assault weapon is really not used for hunting.
Gotcha.
And from what I know about this high-capacity magazine, it does not sound like it's a good thing to have, because like an old-fashioned six-shooter had 6 bullets, and if you can't get something in 6 shots, you probably shouldn't have a gun.
Okay, so thank you for the answer. Here's what I would say. The definition, so you said that you're not necessarily targeting the handgun that I might use to conceal carry with me. That wasn't necessarily your intent.
Not concealed carry, but okay.
Okay, fair enough. But you're not necessarily trying to target that sidearm. And the problem is the definition that you just read does. And here's where I would define it for you. When you see something that says semi-automatic, that's not a scary word. Semi-automatic means one trigger pull produces one fired round. Okay? And then the gun resets itself. Now, there's no difference between that and a single-action revolver. A single-action revolver, you pull the trigger, and it fires, and then the chamber cycles, and then the next shot's ready. Okay? Now, in a handgun that is considered semi-automatic, that has a magazine, and typically the type of pistol that I carry has 6 rounds in it. It just has a magazine that goes up through the handle, and instead of having a revolver action, it has a semi-automatic action where the combustion that happens as a result of firing it resets it so that the next bullet is ready to fire. But it doesn't mean it fires like an automatic machine gun. It's one trigger pull, produces 1 round. But by the definition that you just cited, it would prohibit that because it's considered a semi-automatic magazine-fed pistol. And so her question was correct to answer what's the definition of it. And in that case, when I see the Attorney General push his bills that he's pushed over the past few years around this, he typically defines, he says, I want to ban assault weapons, but he allows the public to have an image of an M16 or some military-grade weapon that looks scary. But his definition comes down to the very sidearms that most people are using this to protect themselves. And so we have a fundamental difference there. So if I vote against that, it makes it look like, politically, then I'm saying that I want people to carry an automatic 50 caliber weapon or some type of a fully automatic machine gun. That's not what I'm voting against. I'm voting against the fact that his definition that he knew when he drove it out, he knew was targeting a bunch of other weapons that even you said. So we get lost in the details there, and that's typically, now keep in mind, I'm not blaming the Attorney General per se.
Because we like him.
Okay, you like him. I didn't vote for him, but let me say this. I'm not saying that he's exclusive in doing this. Republicans and Democrats have done this for years, where they drop bills that have a title that sounds either provocative or sexy, and then they try to dare the other, but then the details of it are untenable to the other side, and they try to dare them to vote for or against it. It's politics. And in this case, we can't afford politics around this issue. And in this case, when it comes to that definition of assault weapon, I don't support it because it's not targeting machine guns. And by the way, machine guns are already prohibited. The type
AR-15s aren't though.
But AR-15 is not a machine gun.
It's a pretty scary weapon.
Well, okay, so maybe I can define it. Maybe I can define it for you this way. Two different considerations, okay? One of the reasons why I own an AR-15, and it might look scary to you, but I hope I never have to fire it. Okay?
Why have it?
Why have it?
It's a bad shot.
Because it's not a bad shot. You know what's funny about?
I'm a good shot.
Okay. Well, I don't think anybody in here is a naturally good shot, and here's what I mean by that. Anybody that's an avid either NRA member or a hunter or a sportsman that wants to shoot their weapons, if they consider themselves a good shot, but they don't consistently go to the range to hone their skill, then they're not a good shot. One of the fundamental things that Star Wars and George Lucas ever got right is if you watch the opening scene of the very first movie, when the stormtroopers are boarding the ship, you see their laser guns going all over the place, and they're missing. Fundamentally, it's a very tough endeavor to put your bullet on target. That is not an easy thing to do. And nobody is naturally good at it. All the Hollywood baloney that says some guy's just born can shoot from the hip and hit what he wants, that's garbage. There's nobody that does that. You have to hone the skill. And in terms of the statement that says, well, I know you're kind of being tongue-in-cheek, but in all fairness, if someone were to invade my home or potentially come after my children, I would want my gun to scare them away first before I had to use it. Now, what's funny is there's another story I think is relevant here. The Pierce County SWAT team, I used to know a number of members of the Pierce County SWAT team. We would watch sporting events together, and I had some friends there. And I was sharing with the head of that unit, the SWAT team in Pierce County, was telling me one time how they had transitioned the SWAT team from a pump-action 12-gauge shotgun, which was standard issue for them, to a semi-automatic shotgun that you don't have to pump. It's easier for them to fire, it had a lot of technological advancements, and they had it in the department for 2 years, and then they reverted back to the 12-gauge pump. And I go, well, why? I mean, wouldn't it be easier? I remember talking about it because I'd seen some of these automatic shotguns and this gun enthusiast that kind of looked cool. You may not agree with that, but I was curious, especially with the technological advantage of it being a semi-automatic shotgun, why did you revert back to the pump? And here's what his answer was. We found that our rate of engagement, where we had to fire, once we broke into, the SWAT team only gets called out when it's a bad deal. The rate of engagement where they had to fire their weapons after they'd broken down the door increased after they moved to the semi-automatic weapon. And what they found after doing a study on this was that the actual psychological advantage of hearing the shotgun go, which is a fundamental sound, usually helped convince the bad guys to lay down their weapons and not engage with the police. And so they went back so that they wouldn't have to engage and fire on the perpetrators. And that psychological advantage is real. I have a shotgun. If you come into my house, you're going to have to get past my dogs first. And by the time you're getting past those dogs, I'm already coming down the hallway with a shotgun that you're going to hear a click. And God forbid you come up those stairs, I'm going to shoot you with it. But hopefully you've heard the click and you leave. I don't want to shoot anybody. And any responsible gun owner would never brag about wanting to shoot somebody.
Therein lies the problem, the word responsible.
Well, and so if you would like.
It's going too long. Jesse, you're going too long.
Okay. If you would like,
No-win situation.
if you would
That's okay,
like,
I'll work
I
on
would
it.
take you, I'll take you to a local range sometime if you'd like, and we can,
I've actually shot
Good
that, I
luck
just
with
don't want
that.
to do it anymore, thanks.
so, okay, well, thank you for the question. Okay, so now before we go, I want to take your question because I know you'll hit me if I don't. But it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes past 8:30. So it's an hour and 10, huh?
I don't hit people.
You know what I meant figuratively. Okay? So now, if you want to leave, you can. I'm happy to stay. This is the only event I have tonight. If you want to have more, I have 3 more town halls coming up tomorrow. It's part of my pledge to have the most to be available to you. You're welcome to come to all of them. The first one is at 9:30, 9 and 9:30. It's 9:30 in the morning in Bremerton, in Gig Harbor. Then I have, that will go for 2 hours. Then I have one in Bremerton from 1 to 3, and then I have one on the Key Peninsula from 7 to 9 p.m. at night. So you're welcome to come to all those. Christine, if you don't mind, let her answer your question.
I just was curious because she had asked about the high-capacity magazines.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that this week you were part of 49 amendments to squash that bill.
Yeah.
And this is an honest question because my dad is a lifetime NRA member. I grew up with a dad that has guns. My husband has guns. I haven't been able to speak to them yet about this. But you had a post where you said that that was fighting, that you were protecting the Second Amendment rights with that. And so I'm curious, how is a high-capacity
magazine
needed,
or
how is that needed to protect your Second Amendment rights? And this is honestly, I want to learn and I want to understand what you mean with that.
Thank you for the question. So, in the previous question, I tried to answer it in a way that honored you. You asked me not to use Second Amendment, so I did, and I gave you different answers. One gentleman, you said I was going too long, but you kind of put me in a corner by not being able to give you the answer. The default answer is, I'm coming to your question. I just wanted to follow up with that.
The
That was,
musket from 1776 is a little different than what we got today.
well, that's fine. That is fine, and you're entitled to that position, and you should know that I will fight for you to have that position. I don't agree with it, but I will fight for you to have that right. Now, the reason why I'm a stickler on this is because I took an oath, and the Constitution says specifically, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So I took an oath to that, and I take it extremely seriously. So part of my answer is, if you start to infringe upon the types of mechanisms that go in to feed these guns, then the argument there that I believe is that you're infringing upon gun owners. That's one answer. But there are others. And to be to honor the intent of your question, let me say, the first thing I would come back and remind you about the psychological advantage. The fact that I've got a larger magazine in there lets somebody know that if they're trying to attack me or my family, that it's less likely that I'm gonna not hit them. So maybe they won't charge, and maybe they won't go through with the attack. Now, if you don't know, this is real, by the way. December last, my family was attacked. We had a perpetrator go through 2 yards, jump over fences, go through a green belt, get into my yard, and attempt to approach my house. I had just gotten out of the shower. I was completely wet, dripping naked, and I hear my wife in the backyard screaming at somebody while my 2 Newfoundlands kept this man at bay with a large butcher knife that big, trying to come in and attack my family. This is real. Now, I don't want to shoot that man. He didn't leave. I yelled at him. I'm sitting there, and I'm 3 stories up from the backyard, and I'm looking at this. I'm completely nude, dripping wet. I'm going, how am I going to prevent
Why
this?
aren't you running when you're, I'm new?
Yeah.
Why are you running?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but in all honesty, the first thought that came to my mind was, that guy is closer to my wife than I am. How am I going to address the situation? So the first thing I could think of was, get that guy's attention focused on me. And so I start screaming at the guy, get the blah, blah, blah. I want his attention on me. Not nice language. But it was weird. The guy is mentally disabled. And he stared at me with a blank stare, and I was like, and after about 30 seconds of, get out of my yard stuff, I'm staring at me, okay, this is the best, I'm not getting through to this guy. And all of a sudden I saw Joseph's little head pop up right here next to me by the window. And I turned to look at Joseph, and I looked at my bed's off to the side, and I had my little hand safe for my concealed carry pistol. And it dawned on me, oh, he got the firearm. So I yelled to Joseph, get my gun. Now, he didn't even know the code to the thing, but that's what came to my mind in that situation. And when the man heard, get my gun, he turned around and left. And there is something to be said about responsible firearms owners. And if any member that wants to claim to be an NRA member or wants to claim to be a Second Amendment enthusiast comes into my purview and starts trying to brag about how tough he is because that's not a true Second Amendment person, and I tell him to get the heck out of my presence. That's bullcrap. A true firearm person knows that if you pull your firearm out to begin with, you better be prepared to fire it. And you don't want that to happen. So from the psychological aspect of an AR-15, technically, it kind of looks scary. It looks like a machine gun. I get it. Some people spec them out for that effect. But it is a magazine that has 30 rounds right now. And it's a semi-automatic. It's not a machine gun. It's illegal to possess one that is a machine gun or has been modified to be one. We've already passed those laws. I've supported those laws that would make it a fully automatic weapon. And in this case, as a reason why it's so popular is because it shoots a low caliber round that doesn't hurt you as much as, say, like if you shot a 30-06 for hunting, the kick on that, you feel it. When you shoot an AR-15 with a .223 round in there, it's not much bigger than a .22 round. And so from the ease of use, and then the platform makes it more likely that you'll be accurate because it's a rifle that has the ability to put added features on there like a laser pointer so that you can be more accurate and not miss or hit an unintended consequence, or where it has a scope that you can put on it so you could use it for hunting if you want to be accurate with it. It has a lot of features that make it very adaptable for the particular situations you want, but at the end of the day, that weapon still fires at the same rate as my pistol because it's a semi-automatic, one trigger pull equals one round fired platform. It looks scary though. But part of the looking scary is along the same lines as the psychological thing. Please leave. I do not want to shoot you. I will if I need to. The second aspect of the 30 rounds is, and I'm not necessarily kidding when I reference the Star Wars feature. I mean, it is, I think we've gotten used to the way Hollywood portrays the way weapons are used. And they make it seem like it's real easy to hit somebody. It's not. And in this scenario, we have a police officer in our caucus. The ratio for policemen, that you have to assume, and I think reasonably you would agree with me, that policemen are well trained on their firearms. They have to train all the time. They have tons of requirements to be accurate. And still, the efficiency rate of hitting and putting a bullet on target for trained policemen is less than 33% of the time. That's what trained policemen. What does that mean? If I have 6 rounds in my pistol, and I have someone coming at me, and it's in a situation that I didn't anticipate that was forced upon me, and now I'm nervous, there's lots of scenarios around there, the likelihood that I'm going to hit that person, even at a distance from me to this gentleman here, is small. There are lots of reasons that in things that come into firing a pistol that when you go to the range you try to work out. Simple things like the way that you squeeze your finger doesn't make you move the barrel of your gun even a quarter of an inch, which makes you miss your target, that you don't know unless you train it out of yourself. And so out of a 6-round magazine that goes into my small pistol, I got to believe that under that type of stressful scenario, I'm not going to be nearly as accurate as a trained policeman. So what am I going to hit? Maybe 1 out of 6 if I'm lucky.
That's about right.
That's about right. And so now my question then is, well, add that ratio up to 30 rounds. I might get 3 good shots on somebody, on one person. It's a small round though. An AR-15 round does not put you down like, you know, the type of bullet that you saw Clint Eastwood shoot with in Hollywood. Those types of guns, man, they hurt. The type of .357 Magnum that Clint Eastwood shoot, most people don't want to shoot that casually. It hurts your hand. It's a really big bullet. It hurts to fire. I don't like firing those guns. An AR-15 is a platform that I can control more accurately with both hands, put my shoulder on it, ideally hit the target that I want to hit. So my accuracy goes up, so I don't have unintended consequences. Ideally scares the person away. But so that's the psychological aspect again, but from a sheer percentage ratio, if a policeman is only hitting 33% and he had an AR 15 with 30 rounds, that means he's hitting 3.3 times for that entire magazine. So I'm going to be less than that. So maybe I'm hitting once or twice with a small bullet that may not put down somebody that is deranged. What if the person, how many reports have we seen where policemen shoot somebody with a much higher caliber bullet that's high on drugs?
Yeah.
They don't go down. And so in this case too, now here's the other thing. What if it's more than one person that breaks in? Out of the 30 round magazine, if I'm only going to, as an untrained person or a reasonably trained person, but not nearly as trained as a police officer, if my ratio is maybe hitting 1 to 2 times per that 30 round magazine, what if I've got 3 intruders? That's the reason why a lot of gun advocates and Second Amendment advocates say that 30 rounds is the right amount to have given the historical ratios that we see, even for extremely trained people, because you end up missing a lot.
So this bill, the high capacity?
Yeah.
Because I don't know the answer. How many rounds was it to limit?
The original one went down to 10 and they modified it in committee to 15, I believe.
Okay.
And that was what it was asking.
Okay.
Well, I got a question on that. Oh, didn't they pass something after the hour and put a tax to it?
Didn't you ask at the very beginning? I said or someone asked about the new bill. Who brought up the first bill? Was it okay? So the very first bill on the night that someone asked me about was the brand new bill. So that particular bill is 2240 died, and yeah, I had a lot of amendments on it that were technical fixes to try to make it better. The day after that, so that was Wednesday night when that bill failed. It didn't make it past the second quarter. That I explained earlier. Then the day later, on Thursday late afternoon, the Democrats ran another bill. And it effectively does the same thing that 2240 did. But instead of having a title that is like one sentence long and this relates to magazine capacity, which is what the 2240 did, they used a pretty clever parliamentary trick. And the title of the bill is over 1 page long. It's one sentence. And the reason why they did that was because you have to fit your amendments into the bill based off the title. And so by having an extremely long title like that, the dare is, we dare you to find an amendment that you can fit on the bill. And I'm working on that right now.
Yep.
But that bill was dropped yesterday, and as of right now, it's been moved or referred to the Finance Committee, which I sit on. But as late as before I got here tonight, I checked my email. It has not been put on the calendar to be heard, and so we have a 5-day rule. Who referenced 2947? Yeah.
So that was the one with, it's for 10 rounds, the 10 round magazine?
It is, and so.
And they attached a tax to it in order to get it out?
Well, so that's the other trick that they did, because there are exceptions to every rule. Yes, thank you for coming. And nice Russell Wilson shirt, go Hawks. So in this case, the exception to the rule of cutoff, where your bills die in different quarters, you have an exception to it if your bill can be related to the budget. And so it's called NTIB. It makes your bill necessary to implement the budget. And if a bill is labeled NTIB, then it doesn't live or die on those rules. And so what they did was they created a very long title for it, and then they added an additional component that wants to tax bullion. Mm-hmm. And we heard the bill to do that last year, and then once we had this going on, everybody just killed the bill because it was bad. The tax was bad. But so what they've done now is they've created the title length very long, so I can't even amend it potentially. They might, if I run an amendment on it to say, can you at least make it 15, that would be better than 10, or make it 20, what will more than likely happen is they will not allow me to present the amendment. They'll just cancel under a rule called scope and object. And it's a parliamentary trick to say, we're not going to let you debate the issue.
So is that going to pass?
Well, that's to be determined. Right now, the bill has been referred to my committee, and as of tonight when I left, it had not been scheduled for a hearing. So as soon as they schedule for a hearing, it has to wait 5 days. So right then, weekends count. So if they did put it on tonight before 12 on the hearing calendar, then it can be heard at earliest on Tuesday. Is it? Did it say referred?
Yeah, February 25th.
Okay, so there you go. They did it after I left. So between me leaving Olympia and coming to here, they referred. So it's going to be heard on Tuesday. So we've got some work to do. I don't know that this bill will pass. I think they may want to do it, and maybe they want to force it through to make an issue, but there's a lot of concern that this won't pass the Senate. There's not enough Democrats in the Senate to pass it. There are Democrats that won't vote for it in the House.
Okay.
But they have enough of a majority in the House to still probably get it through and have some few no votes from their side. In the Senate, I don't know that the numbers are there.
Would it really make any difference if people show up for this hearing?
Yeah, it will. And on that day, you should come down to the Finance Committee here in Renee and ask to have your voice heard. I mean, honestly, I don't think, and I appreciate that you asked me the honest question, and you gave me an opportunity to explain that. Normally, in a setting like this, you can't give that answer in 30 seconds. It's really rough to do it. So usually what you get is, well, I support the Second Amendment and I maintain my oath, but that leaves a lot of people wanting it in terms of an answer if they don't agree with the issue. But in this case, with this particular thing, if you look at the rates that even police officers do, it's really scary. And to have somebody come and try to attack my family and know that I was in a position to where that person was closer to my wife than me and I couldn't do anything about it, and I was in like the worst scenario possible to be prepared for it by being just out of the shower. It's scary. And to potentially infringe upon somebody's right to protect their family is something that at the very least we should debate, which is another reason why I put the amendments on it. I believe that we should debate those things and people should have an opportunity to become more informed. Because the lady that asked the other question, she read the definition, but then when I asked her what she thought, what was her intent, she said she wasn't necessarily targeting the pistol that I carried, but by the definition, it did. And I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there about this particular issue, and then of course, we're generally divided country right now on a lot of issues. This is one of them. And so it's going to take a lot of, I think, reasoned discussion. And I'm fearful that on this bill, by running the title the way they did, and then by using this parliamentary trick to say it has something to do with the budget, is going to stifle debate, and I think it's the wrong way to go. So,
don't they think that the public get kind of fed up when we try something and then nothing does, so they can run around here?
Thank you for coming.
And they seem to do it on not only the Second Amendment stuff, but quite a few.
Well, if you really, the real way to fix this is to get voter turnout. If there's one thing that Republicans and Democrats agree on, it's that we need higher voter turnout. Both sides seem to think that they'll benefit from it. We will see, but the truth is, unless people start to engage and come down to make their voice known, but more importantly, really what you got to do is you got to make sure that you, your family, your neighbors, everybody that you know in the community is getting out and voicing their concern and voting. Otherwise, you've got, I really believe.
We do, we just get out and vote.
See, but I don't think that people know that. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that people really know, other than people here. I mean, I don't think they really know what's going on, and I never really see anything put out telling the voters what's going on, like the trick they used on this for the 10 rounds. You know, putting a tax on it for bullion.
Well,
see, I don't think people see all that going on, because I think if, you know, an individual, if they saw something like that or could read something like that, I think they'd be a little bit more skeptical of who they're voting for. I mean, you can read the Port Orchard Independent anymore, and you really don't see anything other than negative.
Well, that gets into a pretty politically divided
on the
Republican, whether or not the media is being
biased,
unobjective observer or biased.
Yeah.
And you get people going one way or the other. I'm kind of getting the cue to kind of dodge.
About that.
What's that?
There's no question about it.
I would agree with that. Okay, you have something really quick, and I'm going to close this up.
Jesse, what's with this? Do you know these little boxes we've got on our, for voting?
Okay, so she's got...
Our confidential voting.
Yeah, okay, so everybody knows in this state that we are we don't have a party system per se. We have parties, but you don't have to register with a party to vote. Okay, that's the state law, and that applies to every statewide election. However, the federal level doesn't operate that way. At the federal level, and at most states, you have to register and declare a party. And so what we have here is you have the this is for the presidential primary. And because the federal law dictates the rules around the presidential race, you now see the Secretary of State has to add these boxes, because if you want to vote in a federally law-controlled election, which is the presidency, you have to go by the federal laws, not the state laws. And so by the federal law, you have to declare a party so that you can then choose which caucus you're going to vote in.
I've been voting for years, I don't remember ever checking a box before, is it?
It's only for the primary, it's only for the primary.
Only for the president.
It's only for that, it's only for the presidency and you got primary. I think the reason why you didn't see this last time, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at least on the Republican, I can't remember, I think maybe we had a primary last time too. I know at least one time we've chosen to just do caucus. If we just do caucus, you don't see that. If we do a caucus primary, you'll get your ballot. If we just choose to do a primary, you'll get your ballot. So it's every 4 years, and that's why.
But there's only 2 parties listed here. There are many more political parties.
Yeah.
True. They're running for a lot of their jobs.
I'll get to y'all.
For the first time in my life, I have chosen the Democratic Party, and I voted for the communist to help my cousin, President Trump. So I'm not ashamed. I grew up in Chicago. My grandparents they lived and died Democrats, and so I'm helping my grandparents. So I voted for the communist. Sorry, but that's what my cousin, President Trump, said to do, and I did. And that's because Governor Inslee said I can do it. And so that's what that little thing says. Now, I won't do it again, but I did it this time.
You know all the mailers you're gonna get now?
I'll get all sorts of hate mail and everything else, and I'm telling everybody that I know in Washington to do the same thing.
Here's how to do. We're more than. Yeah, we are more than half an hour over.
We're still
And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close the meeting down. I'm going to stand over here. If you want to ask me any particular individual questions, please come on up. I'd love to chat with you. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate all the questions.